I didn't write this down right away. I want to be clear about that. The first few days I kept thinking someone was going to come fix it, so I didn't bother keeping records. Then when it was obvious nobody was coming, I started doing the duty log format, because it's what I know. It's what my hands do automatically. Time, date, incident, responding unit. Except by the end of the second week, the incidents were things like southwest fence bent inward, 8 infected pressing against chain link, held, and Sergeant Dorsey unable to stop coughing, asked about it, says it's nothing, and that's when the duty log format started feeling like a joke I wasn't laughing at. So what I'm doing now is this. I found a handheld recorder in the evidence room. Battery still has charge. I'm going to talk through it the way I would talk to dispatch if dispatch was still answering, which it isn't. Has not been for 11 days. I'm going to start from the beginning, because I keep having arguments in my head with people who aren't here about what happened and why I did the things I did, and talking it out, even into a recorder, even into the dark of this office, feels better than doing it purely inside my skull. My name is Garrett Holloway, Deputy, Carver County Sheriff's Office, 6 years on the job, badge number 2214. I was working the overnight shift when the world came apart at the seams. That's the professional version. The other version is, I was sitting in the break room eating a gas station sandwich at 2:30 in the morning and listening to Kyle Elbert complain about his ex-wife, and that was the last normal thing that ever happened to me. Night 1, 2:17 a.m. The overnight shift at Carver County is not the exciting kind of overnight shift you see in television shows. Carver County is maybe 60,000 people spread across a lot of farmland, and one mid-sized town called Dunmore that has a Walmart, 3 stoplights, and a high school with a football team that went 2-9 last season. The overnight shift is speed checks on Route 9, the occasional domestic, and a lot of sitting at your desk waiting for the sun to come up. Kyle had pulled a DUI stop around midnight. Guy named Craig Fenwick, 43 years old, construction contractor, driving a dented F-150 with a cracked taillight and an open can of Bud Light between his knees, like he wasn't even trying to hide it. Craig blew a .114 on the breathalyzer, which honestly for a 2:30 in the morning DUI in Carver County is not even impressive. I've processed guys who blew 21 and still argued they were fine to drive. Craig was currently in holding cell 2, sleeping it off. He'd been cooperative when Kyle brought him in, polite even. Said yes sir, and sorry about this, and sat down on the bench in the cell and put his face in his hands, like a man who knew exactly what the morning was going to look like. Sergeant Hank Dorsey was off duty, sleeping at home. Day shift wasn't until 6. It was just me, Kyle, Phyllis Roark at dispatch, and our corrections officer Pete Nutter watching the holding area. 3 people were in the cells that night. Craig in cell 2, a guy named Roy Spears in cell 1, domestic disturbance, his girlfriend had called it in. And in cell 3, a man named Albert Briggs, though everyone called him Al, who was waiting on a bail hearing for a second-degree murder charge that I'll come back to, because it matters more than it sounds. The calls started around 2:45 a.m. Phyllis put the first one through to me because Kyle had just come back in from the DUI stop and was doing paperwork, and I was closer to the radio room. She said, "Garrett, got a 911 from out on Millbrook Road. Caller says her neighbor is attacking her. Sounds confused. Says the neighbor is acting, quote, strange, unquote." I said, "Send me the address, I'll head out." And she said, "Garrett, wait. I'm getting another call. Same road, different address." I waited. She came back 30 seconds later, and the tone in her voice was different. Phyllis has been dispatching in Carver County for 19 years. She's heard everything. Barn fires, highway pileups, a guy who drove his tractor into the county courthouse on a dare. Phyllis does not rattle. She rattled. "Third call coming in," she said. "Garrett, 3 separate callers. Millbrook Road and now Sycamore Creek Drive. All reporting assaults. One caller, she says the person attacking her isn't responding. Says she hit him with a frying pan and he kept coming. Hit him with a, okay, I'm rolling." I grabbed my hat and started for the door. Kyle leaned out of his office. "What have we got?" "Multiple assault reports on Millbrook. Sounds confused. Might be a party gone wrong. I'll follow up." No, stay with dispatch and Pete. You were just out. Let me handle the first look and I'll radio back. He made a face, like he wanted to argue but didn't. Kyle was 26 and had been on the job 2 years and still had that itch to be at every call. I remembered having that itch. It goes away after you've done enough calls and found enough things that you wish you hadn't found. I took my patrol unit out on Millbrook Road. The first thing I noticed was the lights. There were porch lights on at every house, which is not how Millbrook Road looks at 3 in the morning. People had turned their lights on and were standing in their doorways looking out. 2 houses had the front doors open with the screen door hanging. 1 house had a car in the driveway with the engine running and the headlights on, and nobody inside it. I slowed down. The second thing I noticed was a sound I didn't immediately recognize, which bothers me even now because I should have. It was a kind of low, continuous sound coming from somewhere ahead of me. Not screaming, not exactly. More like something between moaning and grinding, if that makes sense. Though it doesn't make sense and I'm not sure I'm describing it right even now. It was the kind of sound you hear and your brain says wrong before you have a chance to think about why. I stopped the car and got out. 3rd house on the left had a man in the front yard, standing in the grass in what looked like pajamas. He wasn't doing anything, just standing, and the porch light was casting this yellow glow on him, and I could see from the car that something was wrong with the way he was standing, like his weight was distributed wrong, like someone had filled him with something heavy and he'd settled. I called out, "Sir, Sheriff's office, are you all right?" He turned toward me, slowly. I can describe what I saw, but I want to be clear that even now, even knowing what I know, what I saw with my eyes, and what my brain processed, were 2 different things for a good 3 or 4 seconds. Because brains don't update their operating assumptions that fast. Brains say, that's a sick person. That's a person having a medical episode. Brains don't jump straight to the other thing, not at 3 in the morning in Carver County. I keyed my radio. "Phyllis, I've got a male on Millbrook, appears disoriented. Possible medical. Request EMS." Phyllis said, "Copy that, Garrett. Garrett, I've got 4 more calls coming in. Dunmore Center. There are reports of something's happening at St. Francis Hospital. People are coming out of the emergency department and attacking the parking lot." I said, "Say again?" She said, "Attacking the parking lot. Multiple callers. Garrett, it's not just Millbrook." The man in the yard had reached my car. I don't know when he crossed the distance. I was focused on the radio. He put both hands on the hood of my patrol unit and, this is the part that makes no sense even when I play it back, he didn't look at me. He looked at the car, at the engine compartment, like the heat or the sound of it had drawn him, and he was just going to stay there with his hands on the hood until something changed. I backed up 2 steps, put my hand on my holster without drawing. Sir, I need you to step back from the vehicle." He didn't step back. He just stood there, hands on the hood, and that sound came out of him again, that low, grinding moan, and then he turned and looked at me, and I saw his eyes, and I don't want to talk about his eyes. I got back in my car. I have never in 6 years gotten back in my car. You don't do that. You don't retreat from a subject. You stand your ground and you manage the situation. Every scenario I'd been trained for, every use of force course, every scenario simulation, you engage, you de-escalate, you get control. You don't get in your car and put it in drive and leave. I did that. On the radio, Phyllis was still talking. She was talking fast now, which Phyllis never does. She was saying that the call volume was off the charts, that she couldn't keep up, that she needed state police. She needed someone. She was calling everyone she could think of, and the hospital wasn't answering, and the EMS supervisor wasn't answering, and the state police dispatch line was busy. I said, "Phyllis, listen to me. Get Kyle and Pete, and get everyone behind locked doors. Right now. Lock the front of the building." She said, "Garrett, what is happening?" I didn't have an answer for that, not one that would have helped. I said, "I'm coming back in. Do not open the doors for anyone until I get there." I turned the car around. Night 1, 3:22 a.m. By the time I got back to the station, Kyle had already broken the first rule. He'd heard a noise in the parking lot. Someone calling for help, he said. A woman's voice, calling from the tree line along the east side of the lot. He'd gone out to check. I know he did that. I know because that's what Kyle would do. It's what any decent deputy would do. Someone calling for help, you go. I would have gone. I cannot sit here and say I would have done differently because I know I wouldn't have. The problem is that in the world that started that night, going toward the sound of someone calling for help was how you got killed. He was coming back through the parking lot when I pulled in. I saw him in my headlights. He was walking wrong. That same heavy-settled walk the man on Millbrook had, and my stomach dropped before I was even consciously aware of why. I stopped the car with my lights on him. He put his hand up to block the glare. He looked normal. He looked like Kyle. He was wearing his uniform. He was walking toward me with his hand up, and part of me said, "See, you were wrong. It's fine." Then I saw his neck. There was blood on his collar, a lot of it, on the left side, below his ear, soaking the collar and the shoulder of his uniform shirt. He hadn't noticed it, or he had noticed it, and wasn't registering it, because he kept walking toward me at that same wrong pace. I got out of the car with my hand already on my firearm. "Kyle, stop." He stopped. He looked at me. "Kyle, your neck. You're hurt." He reached up and touched the side of his neck with 2 fingers, like someone feeling for a sore muscle. Then he looked at his fingers, and the blood on them, and then he looked back at me, and the look on his face was not quite right. Like the connection between what he was seeing and what it meant had a delay in it. He said, "Something bit me," and he said it so normally, in such a regular tone of voice, that I took a step toward him before I stopped myself. Something. A person? An animal? It was dark. He blinked. In the trees. She was calling for help. And then, He touched his neck again. "Kyle, how bad is it? Can you put pressure on it?" He didn't answer. He was looking at the ground. "Kyle." He looked up. And by the time he looked up, his eyes were different, and my gun was already in my hand. This is the part I've gone over more than any other part of the whole first night. More than what came after. Just this moment in the parking lot, in the headlights of my patrol car, with the engine running, and the radio going, and Kyle looking at me with eyes that weren't Kyle's eyes anymore. I've asked myself if I did it right, and I don't know. I've asked if I hesitated too long, and I don't know. I've asked if there's some universe where I could have gotten him inside and tied down, and maybe something different happened. Probably not. Probably not, because of what I found out later about how fast it moves. But I still go back to that parking lot in my head. I think I'll be going back to it for the rest of whatever my life turns out to be. He came at me. Not running. They don't run, I know that now. But fast enough, with his arms out, and that sound starting up from somewhere in his chest, that low, grinding moan. I fired twice. Standard training, center mass. Both shots hit. Kyle went down. I stood there, for maybe 10 seconds, with my gun still up, in the headlights, in the parking lot, and the silence was total, except for the radio in my car still going, and Phyllis's voice on it, and the distant sound from somewhere in town, from the direction of Dunmore Center, that I couldn't quite identify, and didn't want to. Then I holstered my weapon and went inside. Pete Nutter was waiting at the front door with his hand on his baton, and when I came through the door he looked at my face and said, "Jesus, Garrett, what happened?" I said, "Lock this door, and every door in this building, and don't open them." Night 1, 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. Phyllis had been trying to reach anyone. State Police, County Executive's Office, the National Guard emergency contact number she had taped to the side of her monitor. She'd reached one person, a state police trooper at a barracks 40 miles east, and he'd told her that his whole sector was flooded with similar calls, and that he had people down, and that he'd pass it up the chain, and then his radio had gone quiet. The television in the break room was still working. We had 3 channels that came in clearly off the antenna on the roof. 2 of those channels were showing their normal overnight programming, infomercials, a rerun of a cooking show. The third was a local news station out of the capital city, which is about 90 miles southwest of Dunmore. They had a news anchor on air at 4:15 in the morning, which is not normal, and she was reading from a paper in her hand, and you could tell from the way she was reading it that the words on the paper were not words she had expected to be saying tonight. Authorities are urging residents in the greater Belmont metropolitan area to remain indoors. Multiple hospitals are reporting mass casualty events. Police are requesting that citizens avoid. She stopped, looked off camera. Someone was talking to her. She looked back at the camera. We are being told that the situation extends beyond the city. If you are in, please stay in your home. Lock your doors. This is not. We will bring you updates as we. The feed cut to static. It came back 30 seconds later showing the network logo and a recorded tone. I turned off the TV. Phyllis was sitting at her dispatch station with her headset on and her hands in her lap. She's a heavy woman, Phyllis, early 60s. Been doing this job since before I was born. She has a photo of her grandkids on her monitor and a jar of peppermint candies on her desk that she offers to everyone who comes in. I put my hand on her shoulder. Phyllis, are you okay? She said, what happened to Kyle? I told her. I didn't dress it up. She deserved to hear it straight. She sat with it for a second. Then she said, what do we do? We figure out what we have, and we hold what we can hold. That's all we can do right now. Pete came in from the back. Prisoners are asking questions. Roy in cell 1 heard the shot. He's banging on his door. Tell them we have a situation outside and they're staying in their cells. And if they don't like that, they don't have to like it. Pete went back. I did a walkthrough of the building. I want to be accurate about the layout because it matters. The Carver County Sheriff's Office is a single-story building, built in the early 90s, brick exterior, flat roof. Front lobby with bulletproof reception glass. Hallway connecting to dispatch room, records room, break room, and sergeant's office. Separate hallway off the back leads to the holding area, which is 3 cells plus a processing room with the breathalyzer and booking equipment. Off the far side of the building, the evidence room, locked with a key-coded entry, and the armory, same type of lock. There's a sally port at the back, a vehicle bay where you bring patrol cars in to safely transfer prisoners. Heavy metal door, locks from the inside. There are 9 exterior doors and windows, total. The front lobby doors, 2 sets, glass, locked but glass. Back sally port, heavy, solid. 4 windows in the offices along the north side, all with blinds and standard latches. A fire exit off the break room, heavy door, crash bar. 2 windows in the holding area, small, high on the wall, frosted glass. My immediate problem was the front lobby, all that glass. Pete and I dragged the lobby furniture, 2 rows of plastic chairs, a table, a freestanding magazine rack, against the inside of the inner lobby door. It wouldn't stop anything determined, but it would slow it down and make noise. I wanted to get to the armory. The armory has the patrol rifles, 4 AR-15 pattern carbines we keep for serious field situations, which prior to that night had meant a couple of barricade situations and 1 active shooter call that resolved before we got the guns out. There were 12-gauge shotguns, box of slugs, box of buck, additional handgun ammunition, taser units, less lethal stuff, pepper spray canisters, all behind a coded door. I knew the code. Sergeant Dorsey had given it to me 6 months ago, when I took over as shift lead on overnights. I got into the armory, and I stood in the doorway looking at it all, and I felt, for the first time since the parking lot, like I might be okay. Like having the right tools in a bad situation was something close to a plan. I took both shotguns. I took 2 of the patrol rifles. I pulled every box of ammunition I could find and stacked it on the table in the hallway outside. Then I went back to dispatch. Phyllis, do you still have a working signal on the radio? Some things. County channels are either dead or one way. I can hear people, but they can't hear me. Or they're not answering. There's a voice on the emergency channel. Channel 9. Someone's broadcasting something on a loop. Can't make out who it is. What are they saying? She turned up the monitor. A voice. Male. Adult. Calm as reading a recipe. Recommend all law enforcement shelter in place. Do not engage infected. Repeat. Do not engage. Infected subjects are highly contagious through blood and fluid contact. Any exposed personnel should be isolated. Emergency network down in sectors 4 through 7. State resources unavailable. All agencies shelter in place and await. It cut out. Then started again. Same message, same calm voice, from the beginning. It was a loop. Someone had set up a recorded broadcast on the emergency channel, and it had been playing there since, Phyllis checked the log, since 12 minutes past 3 a.m. Nobody knew who set it up or where it was broadcasting from. We had one useful piece of information from it. Do not engage through blood and fluid contact, which meant I knew, now, the official version of what I'd already guessed from Kyle and from the man on Millbrook Road, which was that this was spreading through contact, through biting. I went to the holding area. Pete was sitting on the processing desk with his arms crossed, watching the 3 cells. Roy Spears in cell 1 had given up banging and was sitting on his bunk looking at the floor. Craig Fenwick in cell 2 was still asleep, somehow. Al Briggs in cell 3 was standing at his cell door, both hands on the bars, watching me walk in. He said, "Deputy, what happened?" "Situation outside. Everyone's safe in here." He looked at me steadily. Al Briggs was about 50. Not a big man, medium height, wiry, white hair cut short. He had a scar on his chin that disappeared into his beard stubble, and eyes that had the particular quality of someone who spent a lot of time watching things carefully. The murder charge against him was for the death of a man named Dennis Purcell, who'd been found in a warehouse on the south side of Dunmore with a broken neck 3 months back. Al had been in the wrong place at the wrong time, and there was circumstantial evidence, and that's all I'm going to say about it, because I didn't know then whether he was guilty, and I know things now that I didn't know then. "Deputy," he said, "I heard a gunshot. Then you lock us up tighter. Whole night the radio hasn't stopped. I've been listening." He tapped the side of his head. "I spent 4 years in the Army. I know when something is breaking down. You have everything you need in there?" "I have a bunk and a toilet. That's not what I'm asking." "I know what you're asking. You may need people. I've got people." He let go of the bars and stepped back. "Okay, Deputy. Okay." Roy Spears from Cell 1 said, "Can someone please tell me what the hell is going on?" I said, "There's a public emergency happening outside. You're safe in here. That's all I've got right now." Craig Fenwick woke up. He lifted his head from his bunk, looked around at all of us, and said, in a perfectly clear voice, "Is this about the infected people?" We all looked at him. He sat up. He was a big man, Craig, broad through the shoulders, with big hands and a face that had been good-looking 20 years ago and had since settled into something weathered and tired. He rubbed his eyes. "It's been on the radio for hours." Background noise. I was half asleep, but I heard it. "What did you hear?" "News. From somewhere. Some radio station. Saying attacks. Multiple cities. Started in the population centers." He looked at his hands. I've got a daughter. She's in college. Westmont University. It's about 80 miles. I know where Westmont is. Is the phone? Can I use a phone? Phones are down." He put his face back in his hands. I looked at all 3 of them. Roy Spears, domestic disturbance, sitting on his bunk with his jaw tight. Craig Fenwick, DUI, now looking at his hands like they were strangers. Al Briggs, alleged murderer, watching me with those careful eyes. I made a decision. I said, "Pete, open the cells." Pete said, "Garrett, I'm not asking." He opened the cells. Morning, day 1, 6:30 a.m. Sergeant Dorsey arrived at 6 a.m. for the start of day shift, which surprised me because I'd been about to call him and tell him not to come in, and he showed up before I could do that. He came in through the sally port, which was smart. The sally port door had a private code and he knew it. He came in from his truck with his coffee thermos in one hand and his hat in the other, and one look at my face told him enough. He said, "How bad?" I told him Kyle, the man on Millbrook Road, what I'd seen on TV, the recorded broadcast on Channel 9. Hank Dorsey is 61 years old, and has been with the Carver County Sheriff's Office for 33 years. He has the face of a man who processes bad news internally and presents an even expression to the world, which is a skill you need if you're going to be a supervisor for any length of time. He listened to everything I said without interrupting. Then he put down his coffee thermos and sat down in the nearest chair. "Kyle's out in the lot," he said. "Not a question." "Yes, sir." "I see." He was quiet for a moment. "What have we got?" I walked him through what I'd pulled from the armory. Food in the break room, vending machines with chips and crackers and candy bars, a cabinet with 6 cans of soup, 3 boxes of instant oatmeal, a bag of ground coffee, 2 cases of bottled water in the storage closet. The building's water still appeared to be running. We hadn't tested that yet. Weapons, 2 shotguns, 2 patrol rifles, all 4 officers' service weapons including mine and Pete's. Kyle's weapon was still in the lot with him, and I hadn't gone back out to recover it. Ammunition, roughly 300 rounds for the handguns, 48 rounds of 5.56 for the rifles, a mixed box of shotgun shells. People, me, Sergeant Dorsey, Phyllis, Pete, and the 3 released prisoners. 6 people. Location, a single-story brick building with good solid walls and a roof, and a back door that was heavy enough to stop most things, but a front lobby with glass doors that I still hadn't adequately addressed. Hank sat with all that for a minute. Then he said, "What about the parking lot?" "What about it?" "Patrol cars. We still have vehicles out there?" We had 4 patrol units, including mine, still in the lot, plus Hank's personal truck, plus Kyle's patrol unit, which he hadn't taken out because I'd already been rolling when his call came in. "Yes, sir." "Then we have mobility, if we need it." He stood up. "All right. First things first. Let's get the front lobby addressed." We spent the next 2 hours doing what should have been done the moment I got back with Kyle, which was building a real barrier at the front. We moved the flat file cabinets from records. We moved the evidence room shelving units, the big steel ones, empty, 6 feet tall. We turned them on their sides and wedged them against the inner lobby door in a V shape, points facing inward so anything pushing from outside was pushing against the wide base. It wouldn't hold forever, but it would hold long enough for us to respond to whatever was trying to get through. Al Briggs helped with the heavy lifting without being asked. He didn't try to use it as negotiating leverage, didn't make it into a transaction, just grabbed the end of a shelving unit and moved it where it needed to go. Craig Fenwick helped too. Roy Spears sat in the break room and looked at the wall, and I left him there. By 8:30 a.m., we had the building as secure as we were going to get it without a construction crew. The food situation was not solved, just acknowledged. The water situation was fine for now. We ran every tap and they all worked, and I estimated we had enough container volume to store about 40 gallons if needed. The power was on, and the generator was full. I went to stand by the window in the sergeant's office that faces the front parking lot. The lot was quiet. Kyle was still there in the grass where he'd fallen. The patrol cars sat in their spaces with morning light coming across them. The trees along the east fence line were still, no wind. Except there was something at the far edge of the lot, near the entrance gate. A figure, standing perfectly still by the gate post. A man, from the shape of it, in a dark shirt. Just standing, not moving toward the building, not moving toward any sound, just standing by the gate post, with his arms at his sides. I watched him for 10 minutes. He didn't move. I went to get Hank. Hank looked at the figure for a long time without saying anything. Then he said, "The others we heard about, they move toward sound? Toward people? What I saw on Millbrook Road, yes. They move toward sound, and they go for whatever's there. Then what's that doing? I don't know." We didn't have an answer for that. We watched the figure by the gate for another few minutes, and it continued to stand, perfectly still, doing nothing, going nowhere. It was a small thing in the scheme of everything that morning, but it stuck in my head in a way the other things didn't, and I found myself going back to that window over the next several days to check on it. The way you check on something that you're not sure is dangerous, but you're not sure isn't. Day 1. Afternoon. The radio situation was complicated. We had the standard law enforcement radio on county frequencies, most of which were either silent or carrying fragments of transmissions so broken up we couldn't make sense of them. We had the emergency Channel 9 still playing that same recorded loop, getting slightly more degraded in quality each cycle, like someone had recorded a recording of a recording. We had the dispatch console, which was picking up scattered civilian radio traffic, CB bands, some amateur radio, fragments. Around 2 in the afternoon, Phyllis got a clear transmission on a county-adjacent frequency. Another law enforcement agency, 1 county over, Millhaven County. Their dispatcher, a woman named Sandra, who had the strained, flat quality of someone who'd been awake for 20 hours, was broadcasting to whoever could hear her. She said Millhaven County had confirmed that their county seat, Millhaven, was overrun. Sheriff's office there had been evacuated. Deputy sheriffs were scattered. The Millhaven Hospital had gone dark around 5 a.m. She was broadcasting from a private location, wouldn't say where, but had a working radio, and wanted to know if anyone was still operational. I grabbed the handset. Sandra, this is Deputy Garrett Holloway, Carver County Sheriff's Office in Dunmore. We are operational. 6 personnel, secure location. What's your situation? She came back after a pause. Deputy Holloway, thank God. I didn't know if anyone was. We have 1 deputy with me. I have a wounded civilian. We are in a residential structure east of Millhaven. Not sustainable long term. Pause. What's it like there? We've secured the station building. We have the armory and transport. Power is on. Another pause. Longer. Then, Millhaven fell in about 3 hours. From first call to completely untenable was 3 hours. You need to know that. If you haven't already fortified everything you can. We have. Good. Listen, I have information. Before our PD communication went down, we got a relay from State Emergency Management. There is an emergency operations center about 45 miles northwest of you. Route 7 to the county line, then the old Camp Hollister Road. It's a state facility. Pre-designated backup command site. If it's still running, it should have power, communications, resupply capability. We were told to go there, but we don't have transport. I looked at Hank, who had been listening over my shoulder. He nodded. Sandra, what are your coordinates? She gave them to me. East of Millhaven, in a residential area, a specific street address. Okay, I said. We'll try to get to you, but it might not be today. Do you have supplies? Enough for maybe 2 more days. Hold tight. Keep this frequency. We'll try. I put the handset down. Hank said, That's 30-some miles, each way. I know. We go out. We don't know what's between here and there. I know that too. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. We need eyes on the outside before we go anywhere. We need to know what the lot looks like past the fence, what the road looks like, whether the town is. He stopped. We need to know. One of the patrol units has a working dash camera. I could run it down Route 9 and see what I can see without getting out of the car. Or we go up. I looked at him. He pointed at the ceiling, the flat roof. Day 1, 3:00 p.m. The roof access was through a maintenance hatch in the ceiling of the storage closet, behind the break room. It had a folding attic ladder. I went up alone. Hank wanted to come, but he's 61, and his knees have been bad since a pursuit on foot, 3 years ago, and I didn't tell him that. I just said I'd be faster solo. The roof was flat and graveled, with a 4-inch parapet around the edge, 2 HVAC units, and the radio antenna mount. A clear sightline in every direction for about half a mile, maybe more. I went to the south parapet first, which faced Route 9 and the near edge of Dunmore. Route 9 was not empty. It had maybe 20 cars on it. Some of them stopped in the road, some pulled onto the shoulder. One had hit a utility pole and the pole was leaning but not fully down. 2 of the cars had their doors open. From the roof of the sheriff's office 1 mile out, I could see small figures moving on and near the road. And the thing about the movement was that it was wrong in the specific way I'd already seen on Millbrook and in the parking lot. It had that drifting, unfocused quality. The figures weren't going anywhere. They were just moving, the way a compass needle moves when there's nothing to find. I went to the north parapet. Farm fields mostly. and a grain elevator about 2 miles out that looked unchanged. A farmhouse with smoke coming from the chimney, not fire. It looked like fireplace smoke, controlled. Somebody was alive out there. East Parapet, the residential neighborhood that starts about a 1/4 mile from the station. Millbrook Road runs through it. Houses, lawns, a school in the middle distance that looked quiet. More of those drifting figures, maybe a dozen, scattered through the streets without any pattern that I could see. West Parapet, the highway overpass, the truck stop, and past that the grain fields going to the county line. The truck stop parking lot had 6 big rigs in it and some cars. No visible movement. And there, at the west end of the station's own parking lot, by the gate, still standing, the figure in the dark shirt. I looked at it for a long time from the roof, top-down view now, which gave me a better angle than the sergeant's office window. It was male, medium height, short hair, dark shirt that might have been a work shirt of some kind. He was standing with his arms at his sides and his head at a very slight downward angle, like he was looking at the ground a few feet in front of him. Not at the building, not at the road, not at anything in particular. Every other one I'd seen moved toward sound. They'd go toward the car engine, toward voices, toward the shot I'd fired. This one had apparently been in that parking lot since sometime before 6 a.m., before Hank arrived, because Hank hadn't mentioned it, and it had not moved in the direction of any of the sounds we'd made. I kept watching it. It breathed. I could see, faintly, the rise and fall of its chest from the roof. It was alive, in whatever sense any of them were alive. But it just stood there. I went back down. Day 1, evening. The food conversation was the one nobody wanted to have. I called everyone together in the break room. Me, Hank, Phyllis, Pete, Craig, Al, and Roy, who had finally emerged from his corner and was sitting at the table looking like a man who'd decided to be practical about his circumstances. I put what we had on the table, literally, every can, every package, every bottle, vending machine contents, 38 individual snack items ranging from crackers to candy bars to chips, 7 drinks, the cabinet food, 6 soup cans, oatmeal, coffee, storage closet water, 2 cases, 24 bottles at 16 ounces each. There was also half a case of police-issue protein bars in the supply cabinet, 12 bars, which I'd forgotten about until I went through everything twice. 7 people. For how long? Unknown. Strict rationing. 1 full snack item per person per meal. 3 meals a day, supplemented by the soup and oatmeal on rotation. At that rate, we had maybe 4 days before the vending machine food was gone, and after that, we were on the soup and oatmeal for maybe 3 more days, and then we were out. 1 week. After 1 week, if nobody had come to help us and we hadn't gone to get supplies, we were going to be hungry. "There's a Dollar General," Pete said. "1.5 miles down Route 9. I can see it from the east side of the building. Lights are still on in the lot. Could be 100 infected between here and there," I said. Could be none. Could. Craig Fenwick cleared his throat. He'd been quiet all day, the most self-contained of the released prisoners. When he spoke, people listened, which I noticed and filed away. I did 3 tours in Afghanistan. Combat medic, 2nd tour. I know supply runs. I know how to move through an area. And I know when to move. Hank said, "That right. I'm not volunteering. I'm just saying, if someone has to go out there, I'm not the worst person to send." He looked at his hands again. "My daughter. If someone could reach Westmont." "We can't reach Westmont right now," I said. "When we have a vehicle going that direction, we'll try." He nodded once. It wasn't acceptance. It was just acknowledgement. Al Briggs said, from the corner where he was leaning, "There's a loading dock door on the hardware store on Mill Street. Hardware store always has a metal frame loading dock, often with a raised platform. Gives you height. Makes it easier to see before you commit to a move." I looked at him. "You know that area?" "I grew up in Dunmore. I know every building in this town." He met my eyes without any particular aggression in it. Just statement of fact. I said, "Okay." Then I said, "Thank you." He nodded and looked at the wall. Roy Spears, who had been watching all this with his arms crossed, said, What happens when the power goes out? Nobody answered him right away because nobody had a good answer. The station had a generator. Generator ran on diesel. We had the fuel for the patrol cars, which ran on regular and not diesel, and the fuel in Hank's truck, and nothing else. The generator had a full tank, which was 60 gallons of diesel, which I estimated would run us maybe 8 to 10 days at current consumption before it ran dry. So the power going out wasn't an if, it was a when. We'll deal with it when it happens, Hank said. Roy looked like he had more to say about that, but he didn't say it. Night of day 1. I took the first watch at 9 p.m. I sat in the sergeant's office with a patrol rifle across my knees and a radio on the desk, and the window blind cracked an inch. The parking lot was lit by the security lights on the building's exterior. Kyle was still there in the grass. I hadn't been able to go out and do anything about that, and I felt guilty about it, but less guilty than I would have felt going back out there. The figure by the gate was still there. I ate half a granola bar and a can of cold chicken noodle soup and tried to raise Sandra in Millhaven on the radio every 30 minutes. Got nothing until about midnight, when she came through scratchy and brief. Still here, cold. One of us sick, but not that kind of sick. Just flu, we think. Waiting. I told her we were still here. She said good. I watched the figure by the gate until 3 a.m., when Pete relieved me, and then I went to the sergeant's couch and lay down and tried to sleep, and did, eventually, for about 3 hours. Day 2. Hank found the two-way radios in the storage room. Motorola handhelds, 6 of them, police spec, fully charged. We'd been using them for some training exercise 3 months back, and they'd been put away and forgotten. Each one had a range of about 2 miles in open terrain, more through walls if you pushed the squelch right. We handed one to each person and kept 2 as spares. Hank also found something more interesting. At the back of the storage room, behind a shelf of printer paper that had been sitting there untouched since probably 2019, there was a case of MREs, military surplus, issued to us years ago by some county emergency management program as a shelf-stable food reserve. 12 MREs. Each MRE is about 1,200 calories. 12 MREs times 1,200 calories is enough serious food to supplement everything else and push our viable timeline out considerably. Not forever, but longer. Phyllis cried when she saw them, just for a second, then pressed her lips together and said, "Well, that's something." I made coffee in the break room because the power was still on, and I figured we should use it while we had it. I brought cups for everyone. Craig Fenwick sat at the break room table with both hands around his cup and looked at the steam rising from it, and I sat down across from him. "Tell me about the medical background," I said. "Combat medic. Then EMT for 8 years after I got out. Then the economy went sideways and I started contracting. Construction, whatever paid." He shrugged one shoulder. "I still have the certification. It's current. You know trauma care." "I know trauma care. I know infection management, wound care, IV placement, field amputation if it comes to that." He looked at me. "Has it come to that?" "Not yet, but we've got a first aid kit and that's it. No real medical supplies." "Dollar General," he said. "They stock basic medical. Gauze, tape, antiseptic, over-the-counter meds. Worth getting. Drugstore would be better. Pharmacy on Oak Street." He said it without hesitating, which made me realize he'd been thinking through this the same way I had, probably since yesterday. That's only a mile. If the road is clear enough to get a vehicle through. Might not need a vehicle. On foot might be safer, less noise. He nodded slowly. On foot, with enough people to watch each other's backs. Small team. 3 maybe. Move fast, move quiet. You'd go? He looked at his coffee. I'm not someone who runs toward this kind of thing anymore. I did that when I was 23. But yeah. He looked up. Yeah, I'd go. If it means my daughter has a better shot when we can eventually get to her. I drank my coffee. Outside, somewhere south of us, something made a sound that came through the walls as a low, formless note, like a pipe organ with only one key. None of us said anything about it. We'd been hearing that sound, at different volumes and from different directions, since the night before. You stop flinching at it after a while. You don't stop hearing it, though. You hear it in your sleep. You hear it when it isn't there. I told Phyllis to keep trying the radio. She did, rotating through every frequency she could access, logging every transmission she could hear, even if she couldn't respond to it. By afternoon, she had a small notebook filled with fragments, state police units east of us, that seemed to be moving, but not toward any fixed point. A military transmission that lasted 30 seconds, just a location identifier, and the words, "Sector lost, falling back, over," and then nothing. A civilian frequency with what sounded like a church congregation singing, which I tried not to think about too hard, and Channel 9 with the loop, which had started to degrade further, the voice dropping in and out, some words missing. One new thing came in around 4 p.m. A broadcast on a frequency Phyllis flagged because it was odd. It was on a range typically used for industrial communication, not law enforcement or civilian. It was a voice speaking what sounded like words, but none of us could understand it. "Foreign language?" Pete said. "Doesn't sound like any foreign language I've ever heard," Phyllis said. She played it again. Craig Fenwick came over and listened with his head tilted. "What is that? What is—" He stopped. "Play it again." She played it again. Craig went very still. "That's English," he said. "That's not English." "It is. Listen, the rhythm, the pauses." He pointed at the radio speaker. "That's English played backwards. Someone is broadcasting a looped message backwards." We all looked at each other. "Who would do that?" Pete said. Nobody had an answer. Phyllis wrote down what she could phonetically, and Craig spent about 20 minutes trying to reverse the syllables on a piece of paper, writing and crossing out and writing again. He got most of it, not all. The parts he could reconstruct came out as something about a facility, something about a contamination protocol, a frequency number, and the words, "do not come toward." Something. The end was unclear. Might have been a location name that was too degraded to reconstruct. We wrote down the frequency number. Why someone was broadcasting a warning backwards, I still don't know. Maybe it was coded. Maybe whoever sent it was afraid that if a regular person stumbled across it, they'd go toward whatever it was describing, and going toward it was the wrong thing to do. Maybe someone was just scared and not thinking clearly. Maybe it was nothing at all. But I kept that piece of paper. Day 3. Day 3 was the day I dealt with Kyle. I didn't want to. I'd been avoiding the window that faced the parking lot on the south side, which is the window you see him from. I'd been going out of my way to not look in that direction. Hank hadn't said anything about it either, which was his way of being respectful, I think. Or maybe he was doing the same thing. But on day 3, I looked out the window and I saw that Kyle had moved. Not much. Maybe 3 feet from where he'd fallen, he was face down in the grass, dragged himself, or been dragged by the motion of something pulling at him. I don't know. But he'd moved, and that meant he wasn't what I thought he was. He was still one of them, barely mobile, but still. I went to Hank. I said, "I need to go out and take care of Kyle." He said, "You sure?" "No, but it's not right leaving him like that. Taking a vehicle to the parking lot would be loud." "I know. I'll go on foot. It'll take about 30 seconds. You'll need someone to open and close the sally port." Craig Fenwick came with me without being asked. He waited at the sally port door with Pete while I went out. I had my handgun. It took less time than I said it would. I don't need to describe it in detail. Kyle was 26 years old and had a dog named Pepper, and a fantasy football team he'd been updating obsessively the week before this started. That's what I thought about, not what was in front of me. Just those 2 things. I came back inside. Pete closed the door. Craig put his hand on my shoulder for a second and then took it away. I said, "Tomorrow we go for supplies. Route plan to the Dollar General and the pharmacy on Oak. Small team, foot approach." He said, "Okay." The figure by the gate was still there. Day 3. Evening. Al Briggs came to find me that evening. I was in the sergeant's office going over a hand-drawn map of the nearby streets that I'd made from memory and descriptions from Craig and Al. He knocked on the open door frame. "Deputy Holloway, can I talk to you?" I gestured at the chair across the desk. He sat down. He looked at his hands for a moment, then at the map. "What you need for your route," he said. is to avoid the block between 5th and 6th. That whole stretch between 5th and 6th on Mill Street, there's a chicken processing plant on the back end. Small operation, local. But if any of those things are driven by smell or sound, a chicken processing plant is going to have more than anywhere else. I hadn't thought of that. I made a note. Also, he said, the pharmacy on Oak. It's connected to the medical office next door through a shared waiting room. Side door, usually unlocked. Medical office might have more useful supplies than the pharmacy itself. You know the layout? I've been going there since I was a kid. I nodded. Then I said, Al, what actually happened with Dennis Purcell? He was quiet for a long moment. He looked at the wall. I found him, he said. That's what happened. I found him, and he was already dead. I called 911, but I had a record. Old record, 20 years old. Assault charge. And I was in that building because I was meeting someone I probably shouldn't have been meeting. Nothing illegal. Just, it would have looked bad if I said it. So I ran instead of waiting for police. He paused, which obviously looked worse. Who were you meeting? He looked at me. Does it matter now? I thought about that. Not especially. He nodded. Dennis Purcell was already dead when I found him. I don't know who killed him. I don't know why he was in that building. I know I didn't do it. He looked at his hands again. I know that's what everyone says. I said, it's also true for some people. He said, yeah. I went back to the map. The route I'm planning goes along the alley behind 2nd Street, cuts across the parking lot behind the community center, then approaches the Dollar General from the west side where there's a service entrance. Avoid the front entrance where the lot is open. He leaned over and looked at the map. The community center parking lot has a drainage ditch on the east side. If it's rained recently, and it rained 2 days before this started, that ditch is probably flooded. You'd have to go around it, which puts you on the north side facing 3rd Street, which is residential. I adjusted the route. We spent another hour on the map. When he left, he paused in the doorway and said, for what it's worth, you made the right call letting us out. I said, I know. He went. Day 4, Supply Run 1 team. Me, Craig Fenwick, and a surprise addition. Phyllis, 62-year-old grandmother of 3, insisted on coming. She knew the pharmacy layout intimately because of a monthly prescription she filled there. She could get in, get to the right shelves, and get out in under 4 minutes. I said no. She said, Deputy Holloway, I have been sitting at that dispatch desk for 19 years, answering calls about things that scared me, and I went to work the next day anyway. I am coming with you. I said okay. We went out through the Sally Port at 6:30 a.m., before full daylight. Coolest part of the day. Less activity from the infected in my experience, though I'm not certain that's temperature-related or just coincidence. We each had a handgun. Craig had a tactical folding knife on his belt that wasn't mine, and I didn't ask where it came from. We moved without talking, hand signals only. The alley behind 2nd Street was clear. One overturned garbage can, a feral cat that bolted from a doorway and made Craig's hand fly to his holster before we both relaxed. The parking lot behind the community center had the flooding Al had warned about. The drainage ditch was a small brown river, about a foot deep and 4 feet wide, and we went around the north side as he'd said we'd have to. 3rd Street residential was quiet. 3 cars at wrong angles in the road, one with a smashed front end. An upstairs window of a house had been broken from the inside, curtain hanging through it and flapping in the morning air. No infected on the street. Not at that moment. The Dollar General service entrance was unlocked. Not just unlocked. The door was propped open with a cinder block. Either the last employee out had done it on their way out, or someone else had already been here. We went in carefully. The back stockroom was untouched. Floor-to-ceiling shelving with case-packed goods, all still in their places. Whoever had been here before, if anyone had, hadn't come to the back. The store floor itself had been hit. The coolers at the back were empty. Beverages, dairy, all gone. The bread aisle had a few damaged bags. The candy aisle was largely gone, but the canned goods were almost entirely untouched. Vegetables, beans, fruit, soup, tuna, chicken in cans. I don't know why people had grabbed the bread and not the canned goods. Maybe it was just easier to grab and carry. But it was a gift. We had 3 empty backpacks and 2 canvas shopping totes. We filled everything. Medical supplies. First aid aisle was intact. Gauze rolls, bandages, ace wraps, antiseptic. Craig was thorough, systematic, going shelf by shelf with no wasted motion. Phyllis went to the oral care section and grabbed toothbrushes and toothpaste, and I would have laughed except that she was absolutely right. We also grabbed soap. 4 bars of soap. I thought about that when I was packing them. The before world where you could get more soap anytime you needed it was a week old and already felt like a different reality. We were heading back to the stockroom with our bags when I heard a sound from the front of the store. Both Craig and I froze. Phyllis pressed against the shelving. It was footsteps. Human footsteps. Not the dragging shuffle I'd learned to identify as infected. Actual footsteps. Careful. Someone trying to move quietly. Someone else was in the store. I held up a hand to Craig and Phyllis. Stay. I moved up the aisle toward the sound, staying low, hand on my holster. At the end of the aisle, I looked toward the front of the store. A girl, maybe 13, maybe 14, wearing jeans and a hooded sweatshirt that was too big for her face framed by the hood. She had a flashlight in one hand and a canvas bag in the other, and she was standing in front of the cleaning supplies aisle, looking at the shelves with desperate concentration, like the fate of the world depended on choosing the right bottle of dish soap. I came around the end cap slow, hands visible. Hey, it's okay. I'm police. She spun around and the flashlight came up, and she opened her mouth like she was going to scream, and I said fast, quietly, No, don't do that. Please don't do that. I'm a police officer. I'm not going to hurt you. Please don't scream. She closed her mouth, stared at me. What's your name? It took a second. Then, Becca. Hi, Becca. Are you here alone? A pause. A definite, considered pause. Yes, she said. It was the truth about 70%. There was someone else, but for reasons I'd learn in about 20 minutes. She wasn't going to lead me to them without a certain amount of trust building, which was smart of her, actually. I said, Okay. We have a safe place. It's the sheriff's station, about 1.5 miles from here. Do you want to come with us? Is it safe? Safer than here, yes. Another pause. Then she said, My brother's outside, in the alley. He can't walk well. He hurt his ankle 3 days ago and he can barely put weight on it. How old is your brother? 11. I said, We'll bring him too. The brother's name was Tommy Briggs. I should have put it together faster, but I didn't, until I was shaking his hand in the alley behind the Dollar General, a small, dark-haired kid, sitting on a plastic milk crate, with his right foot bandaged in what looked like strips of torn bedsheet, and he looked up at me with those same careful eyes. Al Briggs's kids. Al Briggs, who was sitting in the station in a holding cell on a murder charge he said he didn't commit, and his 2 kids had been fending for themselves in their house for 4 days before the food ran out and they'd come here. I looked at Becca. Your dad, I said. Al. She went very still. You know him? He's at the station. He's been helping us. She looked at me for a long moment, reading my face for something, whatever a 14-year-old reads in an adult's face, to figure out if they're being told the truth. Then her chin went, and she pressed her lips together, and she looked at the wall, and I could see her deciding not to cry. Is he okay? Her voice was steady, impressive. He's okay. He's been worried about you. She stood up. We should go. We carried Tommy the whole way back. Craig took him piggyback for the first half-mile, and I took him for the second. Tommy Briggs weighed about as much as my supply bag, which is either small for an 11-year-old, or I'd gotten stronger in 4 days of stress. Neither option is great. We got back to the station without incident. Pete opened the sally port. Al Briggs was in the hallway when we came in, because Hank had apparently told him, and he crossed to the kids in 3 steps and went down on one knee and pulled them both in, without saying anything, just his hands on both of them, his face pressed against Becca's hair, and I turned around and went to the break room and made coffee. Day 5. New survivor. She came to the front of the building on foot at about 9 in the morning, which was brave of her, or she didn't fully understand the risk, and she knocked on the front door. The front glass door, through the lobby, which was barricaded enough that we couldn't open it, but not so barricaded that we couldn't see through it. She was maybe 60, a doctor. She had her hospital ID badge still clipped to her coat, which is how I identified her from the window as Dr. Ruth Alderman, and she carried a small rolling suitcase that had clearly been packed in a hurry. We let her in through the sally port after she went around back when Phyllis talked her through it on a hand radio signal we'd set up on a civilian frequency for exactly this kind of situation. Ruth Alderman was the emergency physician at Dunmore Regional Medical Center, and she had more information about what was happening than anyone I'd spoken to so far, and some of it I wished I hadn't heard. She sat down in the break room with coffee and told us everything she knew. She'd been on duty at the ER when the first cases came in. The initial presentations were trauma cases, bite wounds mostly, with a few significant lacerations. The biting victims were in various stages of deterioration. Some were combative, some were passive, some were in shock. What was unusual about the bite wound cases was the absence of pain response. Patients who should have been in significant distress from their wounds were almost calm, dissociated, not reacting to the injury the way you'd expect. Within 2 hours, patients who had been admitted for bite wounds started becoming unresponsive, then aggressive. The transition from sick patient to the other thing was, she said, faster than anything in her 30 years of medicine. The hospital had tried to contain it. They'd failed. She'd left through the hospital's ambulance dock around 4 in the morning. She'd been hiding in her car in a residential garage 2 blocks from the station for 3 days, afraid to move, before she heard the hand radio signal on the civilian frequency and worked up the nerve to come over. She said, "I need to tell you something about the infection, about how it works." We all listened. "The bite doesn't always kill immediately," she said. "The transition time appears to vary. Most of what I observed in the ER was rapid, 2 to 4 hours, but we had 2 patients who were bitten and who didn't transition within that window. I wasn't able to monitor them after I left. I don't know if they eventually turned or if they were immune, or if it just takes longer in some people." "Immune?" Craig sat forward. "It's a theoretical possibility. In any pathogen, there's variation in host susceptibility. I don't have data. I don't have lab equipment. I have 30 years of clinical experience, and a very bad feeling that we're dealing with something that's going to require actual science to understand, not gut instinct." She looked at her coffee. "I also want you to know, there was something odd about the way it was spreading. It was too fast. Even for something airborne, it was too fast. The rate at which the hospital went from manageable to unmanageable it shouldn't have been that fast, unless there was a second vector we weren't seeing." "What kind of second vector?" I don't know. I'm telling you what I observed, not what I can explain." She paused. Then she said, almost to herself, 3 of the staff hadn't treated any bite patients. They hadn't had direct contact with anyone infected, and they still turned. Nobody spoke for a moment. Hank said, "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't know. I'm saying that's what I saw, and I don't have an explanation for it, and it's the thing that's been keeping me awake for 3 days in a parking garage." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I could be wrong. Memory under stress is unreliable. I hope I'm wrong." I looked at the wall for a second. Then I said, "Okay, what can you do for us?" She looked up. "Medically," I said. "What can you assess and treat?" She straightened slightly. "Trauma care, wound management, fractures, infection control. I can assess neurological status, respiratory. Without lab equipment, I can't do any diagnostics, but I can do a clinical exam. And I can do minor surgical if it comes to that, with the right supplies." "Craig's a trained medic," I said. She looked at Craig. Craig said, 2 tours, EMT, 8 years after." Something in her face relaxed by about 10%. Good, that's very good." She became our medic. She assessed Tommy's ankle. Sprained, not broken. Properly wrapped it, and told him to stay off it for a week. She inventoried the first aid supplies we'd gathered. She made a list of what we still needed. The list was longer than I wanted it to be. Day 6. Donna Crisp arrived on day 6. She came to us the way Dr. Alderman had. Heard the civilian frequency signal, came on foot, came around back. She was in her mid-30s, compact, short brown hair, wearing a green utility jacket, and carrying a day pack and a baseball bat that had something dark on the end of it that I chose not to examine too closely. She was also visibly injured. Left arm, upper bicep area, wrapped in what was clearly improvised bandaging. A torn flannel shirt, wrapping the arm from elbow to shoulder, dried dark through the cloth in a pattern that told its own story. I stopped her in the sally port before she was fully inside. Your arm. She looked at it. I know. How? She looked at me. Clear eyes, level, not feverish, not confused, not any of the early presentation signs Ruth had described. Clear. Day 2, she said. In the grocery store on Grant. One of them got my arm. I haven't turned. I know I should have turned. I know that. But I haven't, and it's been 4 days and She stopped. I heard your signal. I just wanted somewhere to be. I looked at Craig, who was behind me. Craig looked at Donna Crisp's face, her eyes, then at her arm. He looked at me. I looked at Ruth, who had come to the sally port when she heard us talking. Ruth was looking at Donna with an expression I hadn't seen from her before, which was something between scientific intensity and something almost like hunger. Come inside, I said. I want to be accurate about what happened with Donna in the first 24 hours, because it's important to the rest of the story. Ruth examined her, thoroughly. The bite wound on her upper arm was real. She hadn't fabricated it. There was clear wound evidence. 4 to 5 days old, Ruth estimated, with signs of early infection in the wound itself, the regular kind of infection, bacterial, the kind any puncture wound would get without proper treatment, but absolutely no sign of neurological change, no fever above normal range, no cognitive disorientation. She should have turned. By everything Ruth knew about the progression she'd observed, she should have turned within 4 hours of the bite. 4 days later, she hadn't. Ruth didn't say the word immune. She'd already used that word once, and she was careful about it. She said, "Her presentation is inconsistent with what I observed. I want to monitor her. I don't want anyone drawing conclusions from this yet." Craig cleaned and properly dressed the wound on Donna's arm. Donna sat on the processing desk in the holding area and watched him work with a kind of detached patience, like it was happening to someone else. "Are you scared?" Craig asked her. She thought about it. I was, for the first 3 days. Then I thought, well, if I'm still me, then I'm still me. Worrying about it doesn't change anything. Craig taped the last piece of gauze down. That's one way to look at it. Only way that makes sense to me. She was staying with us. That was decided. What was not decided, at least not out loud, was what we were going to do if she did turn. That conversation happened in the sergeant's office between me, Hank, Ruth, and Craig, with the door closed, in voices lower than normal. What we said about it stays there. We made a decision, and it was a reasonable decision, and I'm not going to record it on a tape, because the tape might be heard by someone I don't intend. Donna was fine. Day 7. Reverend Dale Sickle arrived with 9 people. They came in a church van, an actual church van, 12-passenger, with the name and address of Sickle's church stenciled on the side panel. He rolled it up to the front of the building at 10 in the morning and laid on the horn until I came to the roof to see who it was. From the roof I could see the van, the 9 people getting out of it, and the Reverend himself, who was a tall man, late 50s, silver-haired, wearing a pressed shirt that seemed out of place given the circumstances, and projecting the kind of physical presence that makes you think of words like commanding, though I was already wary of people who projected that in a crisis, because it usually meant they'd been practicing their presence for a crowd that was too scared to question them. I went down. I talked to him through the broken front lobby window. We'd replaced one of the glass panels with a piece of plywood from the evidence room shelving, and there was a gap we could talk through. "I'm Reverend Dale Sickle," he said. First Community Church of Dunmore. These are my congregants. We've been sheltering at the church, but our situation is becoming untenable. We heard you've opened this facility to survivors. We hadn't broadcast that, exactly. We'd set up the civilian frequency signal as a passive indicator and let anyone who found it work out what it meant. How'd you hear about us? I said. One of my people had a police scanner, heard your transmission from the woman at dispatch. He said, woman at dispatch, in a particular way that I filed away. 9 people behind him, varying ages. 4 adults of working age, a couple around 70, and 3 teenagers. They all looked tired and hungry, and some of them looked afraid. They were carrying what looked like food, boxes and bags piled in the back of the van. How much food is in that van? I said. Enough to contribute to the community, naturally. Naturally. I noted that too. I let them in through the sally port. We had a process now. Hank checked them over. Ruth did a brief assessment, looking for bite wounds or fever. All 9 came through clean. We logged their names. Reverend Sickle surveyed the station with the air of a man evaluating a property. He said, "You've done well here." He said it like a compliment, and it wasn't. I said, "We've been managing." He said, "You'll manage better with more people. We were doing fine before." Of course, he smiled. I'm just saying we're a resource. My congregation has skills, practical people. We can contribute. He was right, technically. More people was a practical plus in terms of watch rotations and labor. More people was also more food consumed, more personalities to manage, and at least one of those personalities was standing in my sally port talking to me like he owned the building. Here's how we run things, I said. There's one structure here, law enforcement structure. I'm shift lead on this station in Sergeant Dorsey's presence, and Sergeant Dorsey has final say on anything major. Decisions about safety, supplies, and movement are made by us, with input from everyone. Nobody does anything unilateral. Nobody goes outside without sign-off. Nobody touches the armory or the weapons storage without permission. He listened to all of that with the patient expression of a man taking notes on someone else's speech. Understood, he said. Good. Then we'll get you settled. The congregants were genuinely useful, and that's the truth. They brought canned goods, about 60 pounds of various canned items from the church's food pantry, which was an enormous boost to what we had. They had blankets, spare clothing, basic tools. A woman named Janet Overton had brought her portable sewing kit and immediately offered to repair anyone's torn clothing, which doesn't sound like survival priorities, but actually, when you're looking at potentially months rather than days, it matters. A man named Gerald Phelps had been a volunteer firefighter for 20 years and knew how to use all of our equipment better than most of us did. Then there was the Reverend's thing with Donna. It started on day 2 after they arrived. He came to know about Donna's bite situation through normal conversation in the break room. She'd mentioned it herself, which was her right. By the next morning, Sickle had told his congregants, and by the morning after that, he was describing Donna as clearly protected and evidence of divine intervention in what he clearly intended as an audible conversation, near enough to the common area that multiple people could hear him. I pulled him aside. Don't do that, I said. Do what, deputy? Make her a symbol. She's a person whose situation we don't fully understand medically, and who we're watching carefully, and who does not need to be anyone's miracle story. He looked at me with those careful, practiced eyes. I understand your concern, but people need hope. They need meaning. If Donna doesn't need to be a sign. She needs privacy, and she needs medical care. He nodded slowly. Of course. He kept doing it, more subtly, but he kept doing it. Ruth came to me on day 9 and said, I want you to know that I've noticed what Sickle is doing with Donna, and I want you to know that Donna has noticed too, and it's making her uncomfortable. Did she say that? She didn't have to say it. I watch people for a living. What does she want? Ruth thought about it. I think she wants someone to ask her, instead of assuming. I asked Donna. She said, tell him to leave me alone. She said it quietly and without particular heat, the way she said most things. I told Sickle to leave her alone. He looked at me for a moment longer than necessary, then said he understood. I didn't trust him after that. I'd been wary before. After that, I actively didn't trust him. Day 8. The figure by the gate was still there. 11 days since the beginning. 11 days. And that same figure, same dark shirt, same slightly downward angle of the head, hadn't moved from the gatepost. Every other infected individual we'd seen had been driven by sound, by movement, by whatever it was that drew them. This one stood at the gate and did nothing. Al Briggs noticed me looking at it from the sergeant's office window and came to stand next to me. "How long has that been there?" he said. "Since the first night." He looked at it for a while. "It's not looking for anything." "No. The others look for things. You can see it in the way they move, the way they orient. This one isn't oriented toward anything." "I know," he said. "Have you seen others do that? Just stand?" "No, just that one." He was quiet. "Then, what if that one's different somehow? What if that's not the same thing as the others? What would the other option be?" He had no answer for that. I'd been thinking about what Ruth had said, about the staff members who hadn't treated any bite patients and still turned. I kept turning that information around, looking at it from different angles. A second vector, something that wasn't bite-to-bite transmission, something else. I didn't say the next thought out loud, then or for a while after, because saying it out loud meant accepting a set of implications I wasn't ready for. But I thought, what if that's a person? What if that's someone who hasn't turned, and can't turn, and is just standing there because they don't know what else to do? Paralyzed, terrified, looking like one of them from a distance. I kept that thought quiet for a week. Day 9, supply run 2. The pharmacy run. We'd planned it, waited, watched the approach route for 2 days, and decided to go. Team, me, Craig, Donna Crisp, and Al Briggs, the last 2 additions being their own decisions, presented as facts rather than requests. "I'm coming," Al said. "You know the streets, I know routes. You go without me and you'll miss something." I said okay. Donna said, "You need someone who's already been bitten and survived. If something goes wrong out there, you want me between you and whatever's coming." That was hard to argue with. Gerald Phelps had drawn up a secondary route based on his 20 years of knowing the town as a volunteer firefighter. He knew where every fire hydrant was, where every alley dumpster was, the footprint of every building on the blocks between the station and Oak Street. He drew it on paper and pencil and told us where to turn. We went at 5:30 a.m. The route was longer than the Dollar General run, 1.25 miles, instead of just over a mile. We moved in pairs. Me and Craig, Al and Donna, about 10 feet apart, the second pair watching the rear. Hand signals. No talking. Craig had the shotgun. I had my patrol rifle. Al and Donna had handguns. The town was not empty. That needs to be said clearly. There were infected on almost every block, to varying degrees, but the word infected is misleading because it implies a mass, and it wasn't a mass. It was individuals in ones and twos, moving without direction, without coordination. They didn't work together. They didn't alert each other to our presence. One of them, on 4th Street, was about 30 feet away from us and moving perpendicular, and we went still and silent, and it moved past us without ever registering we were there because we weren't making sound and weren't moving. Staying still and staying silent worked. That was our primary defense, and it worked almost every time. The exceptions were when something made a sound we didn't control, a piece of glass underfoot, the creak of a door hinge, and in those moments, you had about 3 seconds before whatever was close enough to hear it started coming your direction. We had one 3-second moment in the alley behind 3rd Street. A garbage can lid, loose, caught a gust of wind and dropped. It hit the pavement with a sound like a small explosion. I had eyes on 2 infected about 40 feet up the alley, and they turned in one motion, both at the same time, toward the sound. Craig and I were between them and the can. We went flat against the wall. I counted 1, 2, 3, 4. They walked toward the can, past us, 6 feet away, close enough that I could smell them, and I won't describe that smell except to say it went into my brain and stayed there. They went to the garbage can. One of them knocked it over. They stood there looking at it. We moved. The pharmacy was locked. Front door, standard commercial lock, push bar on the inside. Al produced a Slim Jim from somewhere on his person. I genuinely did not want to know where a man in jail had been keeping a Slim Jim, and I also genuinely did not care right then, and had the lock turned in about 90 seconds. Inside, cool, dark, smelling of chemical antiseptic and something floral from the display near the entrance. Everything was exactly in its place. No looting, no disruption. The pharmacy had clearly been closed and locked, normally by staff, before everything went wrong. Ruth's list was detailed and specific. Antibiotics. We found a range of options. Grabbed everything in the broad spectrum range. Pain medication, which required the locked prescription cabinet at the back pharmacy counter, which Al's Slim Jim also addressed. Wound care, in quantity. IV supplies. The pharmacy didn't stock full IV setup, but had saline, tubing, some basic items. Vitamins, electrolyte packets. Over-the-counter medications for fever, infection, respiratory issues. The medical office next door, through the shared waiting room door Al had described, had more. Exam gloves, a diagnostic kit, blood pressure cuff, thermometers, a pulse oximeter. A locked medication cabinet there too, which this time Craig helped with because he had the key type. We filled our bags. We were heading out when Donna went very still at the shared waiting room door and held up a fist. Someone was in the waiting room. We heard them a second after Donna did, the specific sound of human presence, which is different from the infected and different from silence in a way that you learn to distinguish after a while. The rustle of fabric, the sound of controlled breathing. Someone in the waiting room on the other side of the door, also very still, also listening. I said, softly, "Is someone there?" A pause, then, "Yeah." A male voice, young. "Are you hurt?" "No. We're law enforcement. We're leaving. You're welcome to come with us, or we can leave you alone. Your choice." Another pause, longer. Then the door opened. 17-year-old kid, Ryan Mott. 6'1" and maybe 150 soaking wet, wearing a Letterman jacket from the high school, and carrying a backpack with a flashlight duct taped to the shoulder strap. He looked at the four of us, looked at our weapons, looked at our supply bags. "I've been here for 5 days," he said. "The pharmacy? The office. There's a couch, and a water cooler, and there were crackers in someone's drawer." He looked like he hadn't slept in most of those 5 days. I thought if I stayed still they wouldn't find me. "They don't go inside on their own," I said. "Not generally. You were probably right." He looked at me for a second. "You're a cop." "Deputy? Yeah. Is the station. It's what we have. Come on." He came. Day 10. I did the count that evening. 19 people in the sheriff's station of Carver County. 1 sergeant, 1 deputy, 1 corrections officer, 1 dispatcher, 1 former Army medic, civilian now, 1 former prison maintenance supervisor, awaiting trial, 1 ER physician, 1 woman who'd been bitten and hadn't turned, 2 kids whose father was one of the first 5 of us, 9 church congregants of various backgrounds and abilities, and a 17-year-old boy who'd been hiding in a medical waiting room. 3 of those 19 were productive fighters. Hank, Craig, and me. Maybe a 4th in Donna, who'd proven herself steady on the supply runs. Al was capable, but I was careful about arming him. Not from distrust, just from the awareness that his situation was complicated, and I didn't want to complicate it further. We had resources, we had weapons, we had food for, with the church pantry addition, maybe 3 weeks, if we rationed carefully. We had water running, for now. We had problems. The generator was running out of diesel faster than I'd calculated, because we hadn't reduced our power usage the way I'd planned to. Comfort was winning over caution in small ways every day. Lights on in rooms that didn't need them, appliances drawing on circuits unnecessarily. I put Pete in charge of power management, and he was good about it. But the generator had already consumed more than I'd wanted. The figure by the gate was on day 11 and still hadn't moved. The Reverend Sickle was increasingly organizing. Not obviously, subtly. His congregants looked to him first in any group discussion. When Hank or I made a decision, the congregants would look at Sickle before doing anything, waiting to see if he validated the decision with his expression. He always did, carefully, like he was giving us permission. He hadn't once done anything I could put my finger on as an actual problem, but the structure he was building in the group, that secondary power structure, was something I tracked carefully. On day 11, Janet Overton, one of the congregants, came to me privately and said, "Deputy Holloway, I think you should know that Reverend Sickle has been having private conversations in the room off the hallway, and some of us aren't included, and I don't know what's being said." She said this with the careful, oblique delivery of someone who doesn't want to say what they're saying out loud, and I said, "Thank you, Janet," and she nodded and went back to her sewing. I didn't confront Sickle that day. I needed more information before I put anything directly on the table. Day 12. The house on Carlton Street. On day 12, we went further out. The reason was the fuel situation. Gerald Phelps had been a volunteer firefighter long enough to know where the fire department's auxiliary fuel storage was. A tank farm on the south side of town, secured but accessible to authorized emergency services personnel, which theoretically included a sheriff's deputy. That fuel was diesel, and while our patrol cars ran on regular, Hank's personal truck had a diesel engine. We needed to get to that fuel tank, and we needed to get through a stretch of residential street that we hadn't been through before. Carlton Street was 3 blocks long, running east-west, passing through a neighborhood of mid-century ranch houses with big front yards. Gerald knew it because there'd been a significant electrical fire on Carlton 3 years ago, and he'd helped work it. We took a vehicle this time, Hank's truck, which was quieter than any of the marked patrol units, because marked patrol units have all manner of electronic equipment that produces noise even when idle. Just Hank driving, me in the passenger seat, Craig and Gerald in the bed, watching the road behind us. Carlton Street was quiet. Most of the houses were closed up. We moved slowly, idle speed, windows down so we could hear. We were at the 3rd house from the east end of Carlton when Gerald said, quietly, from the truck bed, "Stop." Hank stopped the truck. Gerald was looking at the house on the right, number 14 Carlton. A single-story white ranch with green shutters, mid-size, a 2-car garage with the door closed. I turned to look at it. The front yard had 6 bodies, not moving bodies, completely still, laying in the grass. But the thing that made Gerald stop, the thing that made the air in the truck go wrong, was how they were arranged. They were in a circle, 6 people. I could see that much from the truck, arranged in a rough circle in the front yard, all of them face down, arms at their sides, feet toward the center of the circle. Nobody had done that. Not zombies. Zombies don't arrange bodies. They don't do anything with purpose or pattern. They stumble, they bite, they stand. Hank said, very quietly, "What is that?" Nobody answered. Craig climbed over the side of the truck bed and moved toward the yard, and I was out of the passenger door fast, behind him. He was close enough to the nearest body to see it clearly. He came back to the truck. "They've been dead a while," he said. "Days. They're not. They were infected. You can see there are bite marks on some of them, but they didn't die from the bites. It looks like they all just stopped. Same time, maybe. Based on the decomposition pattern, they've been here since day 1 or 2. "Who put them in a circle?" Hank said. Craig shook his head. We sat with that for a moment. "Someone was here," I said. "After they died. Someone arranged them. Or they arranged themselves," Craig said. I looked at him. He shook his head again. "I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying that's the other option." I stared at the circle of bodies in the front yard of number 14 Carlton Street. The grass around them was undisturbed. No drag marks. They were arranged too precisely to have just fallen in that configuration. Someone with intent had put them in a circle, and whoever had done it had either been inside the house and was possibly still there, or had come and gone. I did not go up to the house. That's a decision I've second-guessed, but I had a team out on a critical supply mission and no backup, and no idea if that house was occupied or empty, and I made the call to continue. We got the diesel. On the way back, the house at 14 Carlton was exactly as we'd left it. We never went back to find out who or what had arranged those bodies. Day 13. The sickle problem becomes real. I was in the break room at 6 in the morning when Donna came in and sat down at the table, without saying anything, and looked at the surface of it. I poured her coffee, sat across from her, waited. She said, "Sickle came to me last night. What did he want?" He has this idea. He wants to establish what he calls a community covenant, a set of rules for everyone in the station. Things like who makes decisions and how resources are distributed. She looked up. He had it written out, on paper, pretty detailed. What did it say about decision-making? A council, 7 members. He names 4 of his own people, plus you and Hank and one other. She paused. He suggested Dr. Alderman for the 7th. I think he thought Ruth would side with him. Would she? Donna looked at the table. I don't know Ruth that well, but no, I don't think so. What did you say to him? I said I'd think about it. I didn't want to tell him no outright, because I didn't know if I had. I didn't know if you'd want me to tell him no. He's been good to people. Some people really trust him. I thought about that. She was right. Sickle hadn't done anything wrong. He'd brought food. His congregants were contributing labor. He was providing emotional support to people who needed it. From the outside, from the perspective of someone who'd arrived here in the last week, he looked like a community leader. He'd built that image carefully. The covenant thing, though, 4 of 7 council members from his group, in a station of 19 people, 9 of whom were his congregants. That math put him in control of every decision. He's going to bring it up in the group today, Donna said. How do you know? Because he told me he was going to bring it up in the group today. He's giving me the chance to seem like I knew about it beforehand, to make me feel included. I looked at her. That's smart of you to see. I know how people work, she said. I don't know how to stop them. I thought about Kyle. I thought about the 3-second window in the alley. The principle was the same. Stay still, stay quiet, let the threat pass, or move decisive and fast. There wasn't a middle option. I'll handle it, I said. I handled it in the group meeting that afternoon. Sickle raised the covenant idea as I'd known he would. He presented it in reasonable terms. Community organization, clear decision-making structure, fairness, representation. He was good. He framed it without making it sound like a power grab, even though the document made it one. He passed copies around. He'd used the station's printer to make copies, which had involved using supplies without asking, which I noted. He said, I'd like to open the floor to discussion. I said, I have a question about the council composition. He looked at me. Of course. You've proposed 4 members from one group, I said. That group makes up 9 of our 19 people. 9 out of 19 isn't a majority. 4 out of 7 isn't proportional. A pause. Around the room, people were looking at their copies. Sickle said, My congregants came as a group. It makes sense for that group to have unified representation. We didn't come as groups, Al said, from the back. He said it quietly, without heat. Some of us came as individuals. Some of us were already here. This building belongs to the county and is run by county law enforcement. It's not a new settlement. It's an existing structure. The existing authority structure seems like the right framework. A few of the church congregants looked uncomfortable. Gerald Phelps, the former volunteer firefighter, was one of them. He'd been working alongside us for days without any alignment issue, and I could see him trying to work out what the right position was. Sickle said, I respect the existing authority structure. This proposal would complement it. It would replace it, Hank said. He said it in the same tone he used to read out traffic citations. Flat, accurate, no invitation to argue. Another silence. Sickle looked around the room, doing a calculation. Then Janet Overton, Janet, with her sewing kit and her quiet way of saying oblique things, said, Reverend Sickle, I think maybe we should hear what Deputy Holloway and Sergeant Dorsey think the right structure is, since they're the ones who've been keeping us safe. Janet, I could have kissed her. The covenant idea died in that meeting. Not loudly. It just ran out of the air it needed to survive and went quiet. Sickle collected his copies at the end of the meeting with his face composed and his eyes doing something complicated that I watched carefully. After the meeting, he came to me in the hallway. He said, "I want you to know I don't have any designs on authority here. I just want what's best for these people." I said, "I believe that's what you believe." He looked at me for a moment. "Be careful of cynicism, deputy. In hard times, it closes more doors than it opens." I said, "I'll keep that in mind." He walked away. He didn't slam a door or raise his voice or do anything angry. He just walked away. That was, in some ways, the most alarming thing he could have done. Day 15. The generator. The generator ran out of diesel on day 15. We had Hank's diesel truck by then, and we'd made 2 more runs to the fuel tank on the south side, and the generator's tank was full again within 6 hours. But those 6 hours without power were instructive. Darkness. The building without power was not fully dark because windows exist, but it was dark enough that movement through the hallways required flashlights or memory. The holding area, which had no external windows worth mentioning, was completely dark. Tommy Briggs had a bad 6 hours. Becca sat with him with a flashlight and told him things. I could hear the low murmur of her voice through the walls, but not the words. More than the darkness, it was the sound. The generator running was background noise, a constant low vibration we'd stopped consciously hearing weeks ago. Without it, silence. Real silence. And in the real silence, the sounds from outside were much clearer. Moaning. More of it than I'd realized was out there. Not just from the immediate vicinity of the parking lot, but from the distance, from the direction of town, a low and continuous sound that in the generator noise had been masked and now was not. It was like putting on glasses and realizing you'd been squinting for weeks. Pete said, "There are more of them than I thought." "Yes," I said. "How many more?" "I don't know." We sat in the dark and listened to the world outside, while Phyllis worked the radio by flashlight. When the generator came back online and the lights came on, there was an audible, collective exhale in the building, like a sound we didn't know we'd all been holding. Hank came to me that evening. He sat down in the sergeant's office and said, without preamble, "How long can we stay here?" I said, "Depends on the fuel. If we can keep running the fuel tank on the south side indefinitely. If that runs dry or becomes inaccessible. What if the hordes get bigger? What I heard tonight, that's not a manageable number, Garrett. Not if they find us in numbers." "I know." "The EOC," he said. "Sandra from Millhaven told you about it 2 weeks ago. A state facility, pre-built for exactly this kind of situation. We haven't heard from Sandra in 12 days. "No." We sat with that. "If the EOC is still running," I said, "it's a better long-term position than this building. Better power, better communications, better supply lines potentially, but 45 miles through territory we don't know. 30 vehicles between us, multiple patrol units, Hank's truck, the church van. We could convoy. 19 people, some of them non-combatants. All of them mobile," he said. "Tommy's ankle is better. Ruth says he can walk on it." I thought about the backwards radio broadcast, the frequency number Craig had reconstructed. I thought about the circle of bodies on Carlton Street. I thought about the figure by the gate. "Let me plan it out," I said. "Give me a few days to scout the route. If it looks viable, we go." Day 16. The thing with the backwards broadcast. We'd been sitting on that frequency number for 12 days. Every time I thought about tuning to it, something more immediate came up. But on day 16, with the convoy decision on my mind, and the need for any scrap of information about what was between us and the EOC, I went to the radio with Craig and Phyllis, and we tuned to the frequency that Craig had reconstructed. Static. For about 30 seconds, just static. Then a voice. Not a loop, not a recording. A live voice. "Anyone on this frequency, please identify. We've been monitoring this channel for possible contact. If you are law enforcement or emergency personnel, please, we are at the Emergency Operations Center, Route 7 County Line. We are operational. Partial operational. Please respond." We looked at each other. I grabbed the handset. "This is Deputy Garrett Holloway, Carver County Sheriff's Office. We are operational. 19 people. Secure facility in Dunmore. We have been trying to find you. Say again your status." A pause, then the voice, male, middle-aged, slightly ragged at the edges, said, "Deputy Holloway. God, okay. The EOC has been partially overrun. We lost the East Wing 12 days ago. We're in the West Wing. We have power, we have food, we have a medical setup, we have comms. We have," a pause, "11 people. We've been trying to reach anyone for 10 days. Who is this? What's your authority?" "My name is Raymond Oates. I'm the County Emergency Management Coordinator. I've been here since day one. We're holding, but we're not. The East Wing took a significant breach, and we lost 4 people, and we sealed the connector hallway, and we've been in the West Wing since. It's stable, but it's not permanent. Can you hold until we can get to you?" "How long?" 2, maybe 3 days. A longer pause. "We can hold. But Deputy, I need to tell you something. I need to tell you before you come here. Something about the situation that you need to know." Craig and Phyllis were both leaning in. Raymond Oates said, "The outbreak didn't start the way everyone thinks it started. There are things in the emergency management documentation that, a sound in the background, something striking something else." He came back on. "I can't. Not on a radio. When you get here, I'll show you the files. Just get here." I said, "We're coming. 2 to 3 days. Stay on this frequency." "Copy that. We'll be here." The radio went to static. Craig said, "What does he mean the outbreak didn't start the way everyone thinks?" "I don't know. That's not a comfort." "No," I said, "it isn't." Day 17. Scout mission. Craig and I took the most light and maneuverable vehicle we had. Not a marked patrol car, not a big truck. Kyle's personal vehicle had been left at the station when he'd come to work the night of the outbreak. A 5-year-old Honda Civic, dark blue, unremarkable. Keys were in the system, logged from when Kyle had booked his personal items. Craig had suggested it 3 days ago, and he was right. Small, quiet engine, low profile. We drove north out of Dunmore, which was the first leg of the route to the EOC. North on Route 9 through the commercial strip, then west on Route 7 toward the county line. Route 9 north was navigable, but not clean. There were vehicles stopped in the road at 3 separate points that required us to either go around on the shoulder or through a parking lot. The infected in the commercial strip, we saw maybe 40 over 2 miles, were not concentrated. They were scattered, doing what they did, drifting without direction. The Civic's quiet engine meant we could move past most of them without triggering any response, as long as we kept the windows up and didn't make sudden noises. We saw one group that was different. Route 9 north, near the edge of town where the commercial strip ends and the farmland starts. There was a cluster, not drifting, not scattered, but standing in a rough group of maybe 20, in the parking lot of a closed auto parts store. Just standing there, together. We slowed, looking at them through the windshield. They were not reacting to the car. We were maybe 80 feet from the nearest edge of the group. The engine was at idle. They didn't look at us. "Why are they grouped?" Craig said, very quietly. "I don't know. What attracted them to that spot?" We looked at the auto parts store, nothing visible. The building was closed, dark, no obvious features distinguishing it from the other buildings on the strip. Except, "Craig, look at the roof." He looked. On the roof of the auto parts store, right at the peak of the fascia, there was a security light. A small amber security light, the kind that comes on with a photocell when it gets dark. It was on, which meant the building still had power. "The light," he said. "Is it the light?" We watched. The group was facing generally toward the building, toward the light on the fascia, not toward us, not toward the road, toward the amber light on the roof. "They can see it," I said, "or something about it. Some of them can distinguish light sources." Which meant, if that was true, that the station's exterior security lights were doing more than illuminating the parking lot. They were potentially a signal to anything in the surrounding area that could see them. I filed that away as urgent. We continued on Route 7. The road to the county line was longer than the town section, mostly two-lane blacktop through farm country, with a few small intersections serving rural addresses. The infected population was dramatically lower out here, which made sense. Lower population density means fewer infected. We saw 3 over the entire 7 miles to the county line, and all 3 were alone, in fields, moving slowly for no reason we could discern. The county line was a county road sign and a rumble strip on the pavement. Past the county line, Route 7 continued into the next county, and the road that branched off toward the Camp Hollister site that Sandra had mentioned. The old Camp Hollister road wasn't technically marked on the Route 7 road sign, but Craig had gotten GPS coordinates from Raymond Oates on the radio, and I had them on a piece of paper. We turned off about 2 miles past the county line. The Camp Hollister road was gravel, single lane, running through mature second-growth forest. Dense trees on both sides, canopy overhead, shade, and quiet. Genuinely, completely quiet, in a way that the commercial strip and the town were not. No moaning in the distance. No sense of anything. About a mile in on the gravel road, there was a gate. A standard government gate, painted yellow, locked, with a sign reading Carver County Emergency Management, restricted access. It was locked with a padlock, the kind that required a key or a good set of bolt cutters. We got out, stood at the gate, looked through. Beyond the gate, the road continued another quarter mile before curving out of sight. Tree cover all the way. A utility line ran along the east side of the road. "This is it," Craig said. "This is where we need to be," I said. We drove back. On the way through the commercial strip, the group at the auto parts store was still there, still gathered around the amber light on the fascia, doing nothing. I made a note to shut down the exterior lights at the station before we moved anyone. Day 18. The conversation about the convoy was the hardest conversation I'd had since the parking lot. 19 people, multiple vehicles, 45 miles through partially compromised territory. The convoy needed to be fast enough to not attract sustained attention, but controlled enough to stay together. Every additional vehicle was another potential breakdown, another potential incident point. The church van was the most problematic. It was a 12-passenger van in good working order, but big and slow relative to the patrol cars. We did the planning in the sergeant's office with the door closed. Me, Hank, Craig, Ruth, and Gerald Phelps, who had the most practical logistics experience of anyone there. Gerald said, "Any convoy is going to make noise. Vehicle noise, engine noise. That draws attention. You want maximum speed to minimize exposure time, but you can't go too fast, because if someone breaks down or gets cut off, you have to have time to respond." "What's your recommended speed?" Hank asked. "No faster than 45, ideally 35 to 40. Keep sightlines to the vehicle behind you at all times. Pre-agreed protocol for breakdown. 2 quick horn beeps, pull to the right, all vehicles stop." "No horns," I said. "Anything that loud will draw everything in range." Gerald thought. "Hand signals. Lead vehicle signals the problem with arm out the window. Convoy stops. Problem vehicle gets everything it needs from the follow vehicle, or we abandon it and redistribute passengers. Nothing should hold us stationary for more than 2 minutes." "We're leaving the building," Phyllis said quietly from across the room. She was listening, not part of the planning group, but the door wasn't fully closed. "After all this." "Phyllis," I said. I know it's right. I just..." She looked at her dispatch console, at the photo of her grandkids, at the jar of peppermint candies that was half full. "It's just something to say out loud." Nobody argued with that. We planned for day 20 as the departure date. 2 more days to prep, load vehicles, prepare contingency supplies, organize people into assigned vehicles, brief everyone on the protocols, deal with any final issues in the building. There were final issues. Day 19. Reverend Sickle came to me the morning before the convoy day. He came to the sergeant's office, knocked on the door frame. He was always scrupulously polite about the door, I noticed. Always knocked, never entered without acknowledgement, and sat down across the desk. He said, "I want to discuss the convoy. We've got the plan sorted. I'm sure you do. But there are people in my group who are afraid. Not of leaving, of the route, the unknowns. They need more information. I've briefed everyone. A briefing and understanding aren't the same thing. These people trust me. I can communicate things to them in terms they can process better than—" He stopped. Better than what? He chose his next words with care. Better than an authority-first framing. I looked at him for a moment. "What do you want, Reverend?" "I want to be part of the communication chain. When you're giving people their convoy assignments, their vehicle assignments, I want to be in the room as a support presence. You can be in the room. And I want to know what Raymond Oates told you on that radio. The thing he said he couldn't tell you over the air." I looked at him steadily. "Why?" "Because we're going to a location I don't know, based on information from a person I've never heard of, with 19 people under my care." 19 people aren't under your care, Reverend. They're in a county facility under the authority of the sheriff's office. He smiled. "Of course. Forgive my phrasing." I said, "Raymond Oates said he has information about the outbreak's origin that I'll learn when we arrive. That's all I know. That's all anyone knows right now. And you didn't find that concerning? It's one more reason to get there and hear what he has to say." He nodded slowly. "Can I ask you something personal?" "You can ask. Are you afraid?" I looked at the surface of the desk for a second. Then, all the time, every day, he seemed surprised by the honesty. He stopped. "You expected me to say no. People in authority roles usually do. People in authority roles who tell you they're not afraid are either lying or they're not paying attention." I stood up. "We move tomorrow morning, 5 a.m. Be ready." He stood as well. At the door he turned. "You know, Garrett, I've been watching you for almost 2 weeks. You're a good leader. You carry it naturally." I said, "I was a county deputy who wrote traffic tickets." "Were," he said. Then he left. Day 19. Afternoon. The figure by the gate was still there. 19 days. I would not at this point have bet money on the idea that it was a person. Nothing living stands still for 19 days, except that it breathed. I'd seen it breathe. I'd watched it from the roof for 20 minutes at a time on multiple occasions, and the chest movement was there. Faint, slow, but there. Ruth had watched it through binoculars from the roof, spending about an hour up there on day 14, while Craig and I had her covered from below. She came down and said, "Its pupils are responding to light. When the sun angle changes, the pupil contracts. That's a living neurological response." She said it quietly and without any follow-on thought, which meant she was doing the same thing I was doing, sitting with an implication that didn't have an answer yet. On day 19, the afternoon before the convoy, I went up to the roof one more time and looked at the figure by the gate. And while I was looking at it, it looked up. Not toward a sound, not toward movement. I wasn't making any sound. I was standing still at the parapet 20 yards away, and there was no logical reason for it to look up. But it raised its head slowly and looked at the roof, and through the 3 feet of distance and the relative angle, it looked at me. I don't know what it saw. I don't know if it saw anything, but it looked at me, and then it looked back down at the ground. I went back down. I didn't say anything about it that night. Some things you need to sit with until you know what to do with them, and I hadn't figured out what to do with that one yet. Day 20. Convoy Day. 4:30 a.m. We moved all the vehicles from the Sallyport and the parking lot to a staging area behind the building, where the chain-link fence gave us a clear view of the approach roads and some buffer from the street. 6 vehicles, 3 marked patrol cars, one of them Kyle's, which had fuel and was mechanically sound, Hank's diesel truck, the church van, and the Honda Civic. 19 people, distributed by weight and physical capability. Hank drove the truck, lead vehicle, with Craig up front and Gerald in the bed with a patrol rifle. The church van, with Sickle driving since he was the only one certified on a 12-passenger, carried the congregation and the youngest members, Tommy, Becca, Ryan Mott. Ruth rode in the van too, to be near the people most likely to need her attention. Patrol cars carried the remaining adults, distributed for cross-trained ability in each car. Phyllis rode with me in the lead patrol car, directly behind Hank. She made one request before she got in. She went back into the station and got the photo of her grandkids off the monitor and the jar of peppermint candies off her desk. She put them in her bag. She didn't say anything about it. She didn't have to. The exterior lights on the building were off. I'd shut them down the night before, per what we'd observed at the auto parts store. It made the parking lot very dark in those last minutes, and we used flashlights to load the vehicles, keeping the beams pointed down. At 4:55 a.m., Hank got on the two-way radio. "Everyone ready?" Responses from each vehicle. He said, "Okay, let's go home." The convoy rolled. Day 20. Convoy. First hour Route 9 north, 35 miles an hour, headlights on low. The convoy moved in a tight line, gaps of about 50 feet between vehicles, everyone watching the taillights in front of them. The commercial strip of Route 9 was worse than it had been during the scout run. More vehicles in the road, more scattered infected, and the sheer visual presence of 6 moving vehicles attracted attention in a way the single Civic hadn't. Infected on the sidewalks and in the parking lots, turned toward the convoy as we passed. A few of them followed, on foot, falling behind within 30 seconds because they moved at walking pace and we were moving at 35. But some of them were already in the road. The first stop was at the highway underpass, where 3 abandoned cars blocked both lanes completely. Hank rolled the truck up to the barrier and Craig and Al, I'd put Al in Hank's truck for exactly this kind of situation, got out and between them pushed 2 of the 3 cars enough to open a gap on the right shoulder. Time stopped. 90 seconds. The infected from the previous half-mile were walking toward us. The closest was maybe 60 feet back when we rolled through the gap. Through the underpass and onto Route 9 north of town, the road opened. 2 lanes, farmland on both sides, no barrier. We pushed to 45. The convoy spread out slightly as speed settled. For about 10 minutes it was almost fine, almost like driving a highway in a world that made sense. Then the church van's engine started making a sound. Sickles' voice on the two-way. "Deputy Holloway, the van is making a sound I don't like. Temperature gauge is moving." I pulled up next to the van on the radio. "What kind of sound?" "A ticking, and it's getting warmer. Temperature gauge is in the red. Overheating, which in a 12-passenger van with 12 people in it that's been sitting unused for 3 weeks is not a surprise. Can you keep moving?" A pause, during which I could hear the ticking sound through the radio. Yes, I think so. But if it, keep moving as long as it moves. The moment the engine starts losing power, you pull over and we redistribute passengers. How? We'll make room. Keep rolling. The van kept rolling for another 4 miles before the temperature gauge hit maximum, and Sickle said, "It's not going to make it much further." I called Hank. "Truck stop. 3 miles ahead if I remember the scout right." "I see it." "Can your truck tow the van?" "With a chain, maybe, but that slows us to 20 at best." We didn't have a chain. The van stopped in the right lane. We stopped around it. 12 people in the van. Redistribution across the remaining 5 vehicles. It was tight and fast and not comfortable, and some things had to be left behind, including most of the church pantry canned goods that had been in the van's cargo area. Sickle stood by the stopped van, watching us distribute people into the other vehicles, and he had a look on his face that was the most unguarded I'd ever seen from him. It wasn't anger. It wasn't the careful control. It was just a man watching a thing he'd carried end up on the roadside, and for a moment, he looked like every other person I'd met in the past 20 days. He caught me looking, put the control back in place, climbed into the patrol car where there was space. We left the van. Day 20. Convoy. The ambush. 12 miles from the county line, on a straight stretch of Route 7, with farm fields on the left and a tree line on the right. A pickup truck came across the road from a side lane and stopped, blocking both lanes. It wasn't the infected. It was people. There were 3 of them visible on the truck, plus what could have been more in the cab. 2 of the visible 3 had rifles, held in the loose, deliberate way of people who weren't trying to start something, but weren't trying to avoid it either. Hank stopped the truck. I pulled up behind him. The rest of the convoy stacked up behind us. I got out. I kept both hands visible. I had my badge on my belt and my patrol rifle slung but down. One of the men on the back of the truck got down and walked toward me. Early 40s. Big. Work-worn. Wearing a coat I could see was covering a shoulder holster. Not actively threatening, but not open. He said, "You're law enforcement." "Deputy Garrett Holloway, Carver County." "Who are you?" "My name's Dale Ritter." He looked at the convoy behind me. "How many of you?" "Enough to be a problem if this goes wrong. We're not a threat to you. We're moving to the emergency operations site on the Camp Hollister Road." He looked at me, then at the convoy. Something in his posture shifted, not toward threat, toward something else. "You've made contact with that facility?" he said. "Yesterday. Raymond Oates." He turned back to the two men on the truck, said something I couldn't hear. One of them lowered his rifle, then the other. Ritter turned back to me. "We've been trying to reach that facility for 2 weeks. We have 37 people at a farm property, 8 miles east of here. We've had 4 casualties. We have supplies, but we're exposed. If Oates is operational and willing to take people..." "I can't speak for Oates," I said. "But come with us and find out." He looked at me for a long moment, weighing. The same calculation I'd been doing for 20 days on every person I encountered. Is this real? Is this a threat? Is there a reason not to trust this? He said, "We'd need to go get our people." "How long?" 4 hours to get there and back with everybody. Maybe less. "We're going to establish at the EOC first. You know the Camp Hollister Road?" "Know where it is. Come there when you're ready. We'll be waiting." I paused. "What's the road like between here and the county line?" "Clear. We've been clearing it for 2 days, that's what." He looked at the truck. "We were working on clearing access to the main road, for exactly this reason." He looked back at me. "How bad is it in Dunmore?" "Manageable inside the station. The town itself." I paused. "Don't go back through Dunmore." He nodded once. We moved the truck off the road. The convoy went through. County line. And beyond. Past the county line. Route 7 was clean. Completely clean. Not a single vehicle in the road. No infected visible in the fields on either side. It was like crossing a line that the chaos had not yet reached, which I knew was an illusion. The infection didn't respect county lines. But the visual of a clear road after everything we'd been through since Dunmore was something. Phyllis put her hand flat on the dashboard and looked out the windshield. The Camp Hollister Road turnoff was exactly where the GPS coordinates had it. The government gate was still locked. Al was out of Hank's truck before we fully stopped, and had the lock off in under a minute using bolt cutters we'd taken from the hardware store weeks ago. Down the gravel road. Trees overhead. Quiet. The kind of quiet that had started to mean different things than it used to. At the curve in the gravel road, the EOC came into view. It was a low, long building, 1 story, poured concrete construction, with a flat roof and security lighting at the corners. A chain-link perimeter fence with a sliding gate, 2 satellite dishes on the roof and a communication tower at the northwest corner. Behind the west wing there was a parking area with 3 government vehicles still present. The east wing, even from the gate I could see it. The east wing had significant damage. One of the exterior walls had a visible breach, boarded from inside with what looked like plywood and furniture. And from the roof of the east wing, there was a dark stain that might have been weathering and might have been something else. The west wing lights were on. A man appeared at the fence as we rolled up the gravel road. 50-ish, slight, graying hair, wearing a state government windbreaker. He was looking at the convoy like he wasn't sure he was seeing it. I got out of the patrol car and walked up to the fence. "Raymond Oates?" I said. "Deputy Holloway." His voice cracked slightly. He put his hand on the fence fabric. "How many of you?" 19. Possibly 56 more within 4 hours, coming from a separate site. He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, they were wet. "You got through." "We got through." He pressed the gate release from inside. The gate slid open. Hank brought the truck through first, then the patrol cars, one by one, pulling up in the west wing parking area. One by one, the doors opened and people got out, blinking in the thin gray morning light, looking at a building that was standing, with lights on, with power, with a fence. Phyllis stepped out of my patrol car and stood straight for a moment, looking at the building. Then she reached into her bag and took out a peppermint candy and put it in her mouth and looked at the sky. Tommy Briggs tried to jump down from the back of Hank's truck and put his weight wrong on the bad ankle and swore, and Becca grabbed him by the arm, and he swore again, and she told him to stop swearing, and it was so entirely, exhaustingly normal that it took me a second to identify the sensation. I stood at the gate in the morning and felt, for the first time in 20 days, something that wasn't dread. The EOC, first hours. Raymond Oates' 11 people were a mixed group. 2 state police troopers, both of whom moved like they'd had the same kind of 20 days we'd had. A county health department nurse named Eleanor Foss. 3 maintenance workers who ran the EOC's technical systems. 2 administrative staff who had been there for a training exercise when the outbreak started and never left. An electrician named Bob Tanner, who'd been contracted to work on the communication tower and had been caught here. And 1 other. A woman named Patricia Garza, who had arrived at the EOC on day 2 in a government car, and who, Raymond Oates told me privately in the first hour, had been the sole surviving member of a state emergency management task force that had been responding to the initial outbreak reports. Patricia Garza was the person I needed to talk to about the documents. She was in her 40s, dark-haired, quiet in the way of someone who had used up their more social energies on something and hadn't recovered them yet. She met me in the West Wing's main conference room, which was also the EOC's operational center. 12 screens still live, multiple radio stations active, a map table with county overlays that had been updated in marker pen across the past 20 days. She slid a folder across the table to me. I looked at it. The folder had a state government stamp on it and a classification designation I won't repeat here, because I'm still not sure of the legal status of the information I'm about to describe, and also because the legal status of things is a question that has a different weight when the legal structure that would adjudicate it is possibly not operational anymore. She said, "This is what Raymond couldn't tell you on the radio." I opened the folder. What was inside was a series of reports and memoranda from the state health department and a federal agency, I'll call the Oversight Bureau, produced over a period of about 6 months before the outbreak. The content of those reports described, in dry official language, an ongoing investigation into what they were calling an unusual cluster of neurological disease presentations at 3 hospitals in the state over the preceding 8 months. The presentations were consistent: rapid cognitive deterioration, loss of impulse control, sensitivity to sound and light, and in the final stages, they used the phrase extreme aggression, attacks on other patients and staff. The reports tracked the cluster. They traced it back to a source, and the source was not what anyone at my station or anywhere else in the civilian response had assumed it was. The source was the water system. Specifically, a treatment failure at a regional water processing facility that served 3 counties. A contaminant, they called it a novel biological agent of undetermined origin, in the report language, had entered the water supply at some point in the previous 18 months. The cluster of neurological disease presentations tracked precisely with the service area of that water system. Carver County was in the service area of that water system. I sat with that for a moment. Ruth's voice in my head. 3 staff members hadn't treated any bite patients and still turned. I thought about everyone at the station who'd been drinking tap water since day 1. I thought about the taps I'd tested on the first morning and been relieved they were running. I thought about the soup we'd made from tap water, the coffee from tap water, everything. I looked at Patricia Garza. How long has this been in the reports? The first flagged presentation was 18 months ago. The connection to the water supply was established about 4 months ago. It was under investigation. Under investigation, I said. 4 months. She said nothing. Who knew? State Health Department, the Oversight Bureau, some level of federal involvement. The reports indicate federal presence at the processing facility, but the details are redacted. So someone knew there was something in the water supply that was... I stopped. Why wasn't it? I don't know, she said quietly. I've asked myself that for 20 days. I don't know if it was slow bureaucratic response time, if it was underestimation of severity, if there was a decision made somewhere to suppress it while they investigated. I don't know. I know that the contamination was real, and it was known, and the population was not warned. I closed the folder. I thought about the figure by the gate, 19 days standing at the gate post, not reacting to sound, not attacking, just standing. Ruth's assessment. Living neurological response. Pupils responding to light. Breathing. If the water was the primary vector, if bite transmission was secondary to something already distributed through the water supply, then the progression wasn't uniform. Some people progressed all the way. Some progressed differently. Some, Donna, with her bite that hadn't turned her, might have had prior exposure through the water that changed their susceptibility. And some might have had enough in their system to lose most of themselves, but not all. Enough to look like the infected from a distance, but not enough to become fully aggressive, fully gone. Just standing at a gate, doing nothing, for 19 days. I was not a scientist. I was not a doctor. I was a county deputy who'd been eating gas station sandwiches at 2:30 in the morning when the world ended. I was not equipped to evaluate any of this, but I knew what I was going to do with it. I went to get Ruth. First night at the EOC. Ruth sat in the conference room with the folder for 3 hours. Craig sat with her for part of it. Neither of them had medical backgrounds that overlapped with whatever the science in those reports represented, but Ruth was closer to it than anyone else we had, and she read with the focus of someone who understands enough to ask the right next questions, even when she doesn't have answers. At the end of the 3 hours, she came to find me in the West Wing's communications room, where I'd been working with Raymond Oates's 2 state troopers, both named in my notes as Trooper Will Havers and Trooper Genny Brooks, on a security assessment of the perimeter. She said, "Garrett, I need to tell you something." I stepped out of the communications room. She said, "Donna hasn't turned because she's already partially infected through the water supply. The bite didn't turn her because there was nothing left for the bite to turn. She was already," she paused, "she was already partially progressed. But she's progressed to a point and stopped. Her immune system, or her neurological configuration, or something stopped it, at a stage that left her functionally herself. Is that good? That she's herself? Yes. Is that the ceiling? Can she progress further?" Ruth pressed her lips together. "I don't know. I don't know what stopped it in her, and what would start it again, or whether it can start again. I don't have a lab. I don't have equipment." She stopped. "The EOC has some limited diagnostic capability. Bob Tanner was apparently keeping the technical systems in better shape than you'd expect. If I can use the equipment here, I can at least do a clinical workup on Donna and get some baseline data." "Do it." "I will." "But Garrett," she looked at me steadily, "you need to think about the water here. We're drawing from an on-site well, but that well, we don't know its status. We don't know if the contamination reached this far, or how deep it penetrated. So we don't drink from the tap. We should boil and filter at minimum. Better would be to test, but I don't have a testing kit. We have bottled water from the convoy load. We start there." "Okay." She went back inside. I went to find Al Briggs. The figure in the dark shirt. I told Al what I'd put together. About the water. About the progression. About what I'd seen the figure by the gate do on the last morning. Look up. Look at me. Look back down. He sat with it for a while. He had the careful eyes and the careful thinking process that I'd come to rely on over the past 20 days, more than I'd expected to rely on a man I'd picked up for an alleged murder. He said, "You're telling me that there might be people, infected people who haven't fully progressed, who are still in there somewhere." "I don't know that. I'm telling you what I observed and what the documents suggest, and I'm not drawing a conclusion because I don't have the knowledge to draw it. But you're thinking it." "I'm thinking it." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Is there any way to know, without going back? Ruth might be able to tell us something from her assessment of Donna, if the same physiological pattern shows up in someone who's presenting as fully infected." I stopped. "I don't know. I don't know how you'd get close enough to find out without getting close to something that will try to bite you, he said. Yes. He nodded. He looked at the floor. Garrett, the thing you said about my kids, that you'd try to reach Westmont. Craig's daughter was at Westmont too, 3 hours south. Neither of them had said anything about it for 20 days, because there were more immediate things to say, and because saying it out loud made it real, in a way that hurt. When we're stable here, I said, when the perimeter is secure, and we've got the Ritter Group incorporated, and we know what we're working with, then we go south. He looked at me with those careful eyes. I believe you, he said. He went back into the West Wing. Later, day 22. Dale Ritter arrived with 39 people, slightly more than he'd estimated. They came in 2 trucks and 4 passenger cars, a modest convoy that had navigated the clear section of Route 7 without incident. The integration of 60-ish people into the EOC was chaotic in the specific way that large numbers of exhausted, stressed humans in a limited space always is, and it took most of that day to work out sleeping arrangements, supply-sharing protocols, and work assignments. Sickle surprised me on that day. He worked alongside Gerald Phelps and Dale Ritter, 2 men who had no particular patience for ceremonial authority, on the physical organization of the West Wing's storage areas, moving and sorting without reference to position or hierarchy, just doing the work. At the end of the day, he came to find me where I was going over the perimeter security plan. He said, "You were right, about the Covenant. It was the wrong move in the wrong place." I looked at him. He said, "I'm not apologizing for wanting to protect my people, but the structure I proposed would have been, the control would have been mine, and I told myself it was for them." He paused. "I've spent 30 years being the person people look to, and I don't always notice anymore when I'm doing it for the right reasons." I said, "I appreciate you saying that. I'm not asking for anything in return." "I know." He went back to sorting supplies. I thought about what he'd said for a long time after. Not because it resolved anything. One honest conversation doesn't undo a pattern. But because I'd seen more certainty and more performance from people in the past 3 weeks than I'd seen in 6 years of law enforcement. And someone choosing actual honesty over either of those things was worth sitting with. Day 23. The well. Ruth tested the well water using the EOC's limited laboratory capacity and Bob Tanner's help. She couldn't do a full analysis. She didn't have the right equipment for that. What she could do was a basic biological contamination test that was included in the EOC's emergency preparation kit, designed for identifying bacterial contamination in field water sources. The biological test came back contaminated. Not the same contaminant documented in the state health reports, or not identifiably so, with the limited test kit available, but something. Some biological presence that shouldn't have been there. We switched entirely to the bottled water from the convoy and from Ritter's group supply, which was significant, but not unlimited. Rain collection became a priority. The EOC's roof had drainage capability, and Bob Tanner rigged collection containers in about 6 hours. The on-site tanks could be used for non-potable purposes. Sanitation, washing, drinking and cooking were on collected water only, effective immediately. The implication that everyone who had been drinking tap water in Dunmore, in Carver County, in the 3-county service area, might have had some exposure to whatever was in the regional water supply. That implication didn't go away just because we switched to rain collection. It sat there. I looked at our 60-ish people and tried to do a mental triage of neurological status that I was completely unqualified to do. Did anyone seem cognitively off? Slightly slower than normal? Slightly less sensitive to pain than they should be? Probably not. Probably they were just tired and scared and hungry and grieving. But I watched anyway. Ruth did the Donna assessment over the course of day 22 and 23. She came to me with what she had on the morning of day 23. "Donna is stable," she said. "No progression since I've been monitoring her. Her wound is healing normally, the bite wound, regular bacterial infection, responding to the antibiotics we got from the pharmacy. Her neurological status is essentially normal. There are some subtleties in her responses that I'd want to examine further with proper equipment. But she's..." Ruth paused. "She's Donna. That's my clinical assessment. Is she contagious? I don't know. I genuinely don't know. I've been careful with her, and I'd recommend continuing to be careful, but I don't know. Does she know that? She does. She's been more careful about contact than any of us have asked her to be. She knows what she is, and what she might be, and she's handling it with more grace than I would. I nodded. The figure at the gate, in Dunmore. Ruth looked at me. If we're going south, toward Westmont, we pass through Dunmore. If that figure is still there. If they're still there, Ruth said carefully. If they're still there, and if your theory about partial progression is right. It's not a theory. It's a hypothesis. I'd need significant evidence before calling it a theory. Your hypothesis. She looked at the wall for a moment. If the hypothesis is correct, then that individual might be aware, at some level. Not in the way any of us are aware, but not fully gone either. And if that's true, then there are likely others in the same state. And if, she stopped, if the contamination was primary, and bite was secondary, and if some percentage of people exposed to the contamination didn't fully progress, then the number of people in that liminal state could be, she stopped again. Could be significant, I said. Yes. We sat with that. Okay, I said. We go south when we go south, and we see what's at the gate when we get there. Day 24. Radio. The backwards broadcast had stopped. We'd been monitoring the frequency since our arrival at the EOC, and on day 24, with the convoy plus Ritter's group, plus the EOC's 11, giving us a head count of about 70 people, in and around the facility, the backwards broadcast finally went to silence. Not static. Silence. Like someone had shut it off. Phyllis reported it at 6 a.m. The broadcast on that frequency is off. I've been scanning around it for other transmissions. There's nothing. How long has it been silent? I can't say exactly. I've been checking every 2 hours. It was there at midnight. It was gone at 2 a.m. Someone had turned off a loop broadcast, or the device broadcasting it had run out of power, or the person who'd been maintaining it. I didn't finish that thought. The backwards broadcast, in the partial reconstruction Craig had made on that early day. Do not come toward, and a frequency number, which was the frequency we'd used to reach Raymond Oates, which implied that the broadcast had been pointing people toward the EOC. Someone had been directing survivors to the EOC frequency, encoded backwards, for a reason I still wasn't entirely sure I understood. Who broadcast a warning backwards? Raymond Oates had no knowledge of it. He'd been on the EOC frequency since day one but hadn't set up any external broadcasts. Patricia Garza had gone quiet when I asked her about it. Not the quiet of someone who doesn't know. The quiet of someone deciding what to say. She said, someone at the processing facility, the water treatment plant. When the initial outbreak analysis was done and the water connection was made, someone at that facility set up a radio transmitter on its own power supply. I know about it because it was in the incident logs. It was meant to point people toward the EOC without drawing attention to the source. Backwards encoding so it would be discovered by people who were looking carefully, not by someone scanning randomly. Why not just a regular broadcast? She said. Because the water treatment facility is in the opposite direction from the EOC. And whoever set it up was afraid that if people knew where the broadcast was coming from, they'd go to the facility instead of the EOC. And the facility, she paused. The facility is in Millhaven, in the center of what became the densest infection zone in the region. Sandra from Millhaven County, who had called us on that first night and given us the EOC coordinates. Sandra, who had been hiding with a deputy 12 days after we lost contact. Sandra, who had never called back. I didn't say that out loud. I put it somewhere and left it there. Someone at the processing facility set up that transmitter, I said. Someone who knew what the water contained and knew the EOC was the place to go. Yes, an inside person. An inside person who had a conscience. Yes. She looked at her hands. Too late. But yes. Days 25 to 28. The EOC settled into something that could, with the right amount of willful optimism, be called functional. 71 people. 2 state troopers and a deputy for security structure. A former combat medic and an ER physician for medical. A former volunteer firefighter with 20 years of practical experience for maintenance and defense. Multiple agricultural background people from Ritter's Farm Group who started, on day 26, talking about the possibility of planting something in the cleared land adjacent to the facility before the season fully shifted. A 17-year-old boy who turned out to have an almost intuitive understanding of the EOC's communication systems, and who spent most of every day at a radio station trying to reach signals that might indicate other operational survivor communities. Ryan Mott, headphones on, leaning over the equipment with his Letterman jacket thrown over the back of the chair, scanning frequencies with a patience and focus that was more than his 17 years should have been able to supply. On day 27, he found something. He pulled me over with a hand wave, the kind you do when you don't want to make noise. He slid one headphone off his ear. "Here," he said. I leaned into the monitor speaker. A broadcast. Clear. Not a loop. Not backwards. Not degraded. Live. A voice reading what sounded like a structured update. Weather information. A supply inventory. A count of personnel. A voice doing an honest, regular status report for anyone listening. That's a functional survivor settlement, Ryan said. Someone's doing scheduled broadcasts. This isn't a one-time signal. This is a routine. Where are they? He pointed at the map on the wall. If the frequency and the signal propagation are what I think they are, they're due east. Maybe 60, 80 miles. 60 to 80 miles east. I looked at the map. East of us. East of Carver County. Past the Millhaven zone. East was the direction I didn't know anything about. It was also the direction you'd need to go if you wanted to go further than the EOC. If you were thinking about something larger than a single facility housing 71 people. I wasn't ready to think about that yet, but I wasn't not thinking about it either. Day 29. What I know. In the interest of being accurate about where we are, the EOC is stable. We have the perimeter secured. 2-layer fence with the inner layer reinforced. Watch rotation at the 4 corners. Vehicle barriers on both approaches to the gate. No significant infected presence in the immediate area, likely because we're in a low-density zone and we've been careful about noise and light discipline. We have food. Between what we brought, what Ritter's group brought, and what the EOC had stocked for emergency use, we have 3 to 4 months at current consumption rate if we're careful. The agricultural people say they can start planting within 2 weeks and have a first small harvest inside 60 days from planting, which extends the timeline significantly. We have medicine. Ruth and Craig together have enough to manage trauma, infection, and basic health needs for the group for the near term. The list of what we don't have is longer, but what we do have is more than enough to keep people alive. We have communications. Ryan Mott, who has become the most indispensable person in the facility, despite being the youngest, has the radio systems in better shape than they've been since the EOC was built. He's been logging every signal he finds, building a picture of what's still operational and where. We have knowledge we don't entirely know what to do with. The folder from Patricia Garza, the water supply documentation, the implication about partial progression. Donna Crisp, who is alive and herself, and sitting in the West Wing eating MRE number 9 and reading a battered paperback she found in the administrative storage room. The figure at the gate on Carlton Street in Dunmore is still there, presumably, or was as of day 20, when we drove past it going north. We will pass it going south. I don't know what we'll do when we do. Al Briggs asked me yesterday about the murder charge. He said, in the way he says most things, simply and without drama, I know this isn't the time. I know there are more important things. But I want you to know, when things stabilize, I'd like someone to look into what actually happened to Dennis Purcell. I told him I'd look into it myself. When things stabilize. His kids are both okay. Tommy's ankle is healing. Becca has started helping Ryan with the radio systems, watching what he does, learning it. She's quick. She'll be better at it than him within a month. He's already said so, in the resigned tone of someone with a healthy ego and a realistic assessment. Craig Fenwick's daughter. Craig hasn't talked about it in almost 2 weeks, but I watch him look southeast when he's outside, in the direction of Westmont University, and I know he's counting the miles. When we're ready, when the route is scouted and the convoy is prepared, we'll go. Hank Dorsey stopped coughing, which he'd been doing since about day 12, and when I mentioned it, he said it was allergies. I looked at him for a long moment, and he looked back at me with his 61-year-old steady face and said, "Allergies, Garrett. So it's allergies. That's what it is." Reverend Sickle has, in the past 4 days, become the most useful person in the facility at managing group anxiety. He moves through people. He talks to them. He's genuinely good at listening and at saying the right things, and he's been doing it without any obvious agenda. I watch him anyway. I always will. But I'm watching him differently than I was. Phyllis is on the radio every day. She has 19 years of dispatch experience and the most organized person I've ever met, and she's building a communication protocol for the EOC that Raymond Oates says is better than the one they had before the outbreak. She has the photo of her grandkids on the monitor in front of her. The peppermint candy jar is on the desk, 3/4 full now, because she brought the whole jar, and she's the only one who eats them. I went to the south fence last night after my watch rotation and stood there in the dark, looking at the tree line, listening. The forest out here is quiet, in a way that the town was not. Wind through leaves, an owl somewhere east, doing its owl thing with no particular awareness of or interest in the end of the world. I've been awake for most of the night every night since day 1. Some of that is practical. The watch schedule doesn't leave a lot of continuous sleep time. Most of it is the parking lot. I've been going back to the parking lot in my head since the night it happened. 2:30 in the morning under the security lights. Kyle walking toward me with his hand up against the headlight glare. And the thing I always stop on. The thing I always pull up and look at and can't resolve. The moment before. The moment before he looked wrong. When he was just Kyle, walking toward me across the parking lot of the Carver County Sheriff's Office on an overnight shift that was supposed to be quiet. I think about that a lot. I think about a lot of things. Day 30. The morning of day 30, I took the recorder outside. It was early, before 6, the sky going from flat black to the specific dark blue that's not quite night anymore. I stood by the south fence with my coffee, filtered and boiled, as per Ruth's instructions, and I let the recorder run. I don't know if anyone will ever hear this. That's not why I made it. I made it for the same reason I kept doing the duty log on paper after the paper ran out, and I started using the backs of evidence inventory forms, which is that, when everything goes sideways, you either build something to hold on to, or you go sideways with it. And I'm not going sideways. I made a call to hang on, and I'm hanging on. There are 71 people in this building behind me. 4 of them have medical training of some kind. 5 or 6 of them have real combat or tactical experience. A dozen or so have practical skills that matter: carpentry, agriculture, vehicle maintenance, communications. The rest are teachers and accountants, and a church congregation, and a 17-year-old kid in a Letterman jacket who can see frequencies. We're not ready for what's next. But I think we're as ready as anyone has a right to expect. Raymond Oates told me yesterday that before the EOC's comms went down 3 weeks ago, there were 14 other active law enforcement or emergency management units broadcasting on state channels. Some of them have gone quiet since. Some are still going. If Ryan Mott's signal work and Phyllis's protocol building do what I think they can do, we'll start finding them, the ones that are still there, and we'll figure out what comes after 2 facilities. I used to think about my county, 600 square miles of farmland and 1 small town. I knew every road on it. I knew where every gas station was, every rest stop, every hidden turnoff. I knew the traffic patterns on Route 9 at 3 a.m. I knew which houses had dogs in the yard. I knew which bars on 4th Street closed at 2, and which ones the owners let run till 3 if the crowd was good. That county is not the thing I know anymore. What I know is different now. I know where the food is in this building, and I know the watch rotation schedule, and I know which fence post is the weakest, and I know that Ruth is worried about Hank, and I know that Craig looks southeast when he's outside. And I know that Becca Briggs is going to be better at communications than anyone here within 6 weeks. That's a different kind of knowing. It's smaller in some ways and larger in others. I'm still figuring out the difference. The sky is getting lighter. The trees are coming out of black into shapes. Somewhere inside, people are starting to wake up. I can hear the first sounds of the morning, footsteps, a door, Phyllis's voice on the radio doing a frequency check. Yesterday, Ryan said there was a pattern to the settlement broadcast from the east. The timing of it, the content, the structure of the updates. He said it was law enforcement. He could hear it in the voice, the phrasing. Someone was doing the same thing I was doing, 70 miles east of here, and they'd been doing it every day, and they were still there. I need to talk to them. I need to know what they've found, what they know, what it looks like from their side. I need to know if there are more between here and there, and if the route is viable, and what the infected population looks like further east, where the density might be different. I need to know if they've heard anything about what's south of us, between here and Westmont. There's a lot to do. The recorder is almost out of battery. I'll find more batteries, or I'll find another recorder, or I'll go back to paper. Either way, the record continues. You don't stop keeping the record. You don't stop doing the duty log because the format has changed or the form has run out. You adapt the method and you keep going. Carver County Sheriff's Office, Deputy Garrett Holloway, badge number 2214. Still operational. What happened at the gate? 3 weeks after we left Dunmore, when the EOC was running well enough for me to be away for a day with a 2-vehicle team, we drove south. Purpose: scout the route to Westmont. Secondary: resupply pass through Dunmore if the station had anything we'd left behind worth recovering. Tertiary: the gate. Team: me, Craig, Al, and Donna. Same 4 who'd done the pharmacy run. The people I trusted the most in a vehicle moving fast through uncertain territory. We didn't go into Dunmore Center. We came in from the north and stayed on the perimeter roads, which took us past the station. The exterior of the station looked intact. The lobby glass was still intact, which meant nothing had pushed through our lobby barriers. The parking lot was empty except for the 3 patrol cars we'd left behind. And the gate post. We stopped the car about 40 feet back. The figure was still there. 50-some days since the beginning of everything, and it was still standing at the gate post in the dark shirt, with the slightly downward angle of the head. I got out of the car. The others stayed in, doors open, hands ready. I walked toward the gate. At 30 feet, the figure didn't react to my footsteps. At 20 feet, it didn't react. At 15 feet, I stopped. Up close, in daylight, rather than through a window or from a roof, a man, late 50s or early 60s, dark work shirt, that was the kind of shirt any contractor or utility worker would wear. Gray stubble on his face, hands at his sides, mouth slightly open, the way they all held their mouths. I said, "Hey." He didn't react. His gaze was at the ground about 4 feet in front of him. I said, "If there's anything in there, I need you to look up." Nothing. I said, "Look up. Right now. Look up at me." 1 second. 2 seconds. His head came up. Slow. Very slow. Not the snap toward sound that the others did. Slow. Like something trying to remember how. He looked at me. His eyes were not the eyes I'd seen on Millbrook Road. Not the eyes that had nothing behind them. They were, I can't say they were normal. They weren't. But they weren't nothing. They were something. I stood at the gate and looked at him for a long time. He looked back. His breath was visible in the cool morning air, slow and regular. I said, "I don't know if you understand me, but we're here. We're not going anywhere. And if there's a way to pull you back from wherever you are, we're going to find it. That's the job now." He looked at me. I don't know if he understood. I don't know what he was. I don't know what any of this is, or where it goes, or what we're supposed to do with the information that the world fell apart because of something in the water, and there are people standing at gate posts all over the county because they're in between, because they didn't go all the way. I went back to the car. Craig said, "Well?" He looked at me. A pause. He looked at you. Like, on purpose? When I asked him to. Craig looked at the gate, then at the road ahead of us, going south toward Westmont. What do? We go south, and we find your daughter, and then we come back, and then we figure out the next thing. He was quiet. Okay, he said. Yeah, okay. I put the car in drive. In the rearview mirror, the figure at the gate stood at the gatepost in his dark work shirt, in the thin morning light, and watched us go. His head turned to follow the car. The road south was long, and I didn't know what was on it, and I was still scared, and I drove anyway. That's the whole story. That's all of it so far. I'm Deputy Garrett Holloway, Carver County Sheriff's Office. Whatever this is now, this thing we're building, this road south, these people in the EOC who are planting things in the ground and watching frequencies, it's not over. I don't think it's supposed to be over yet.